The ballroom fell silent when Duke Adrian Blackthorne walked past England's most celebrated beauties and stopped before the one woman no one had noticed all evening. Clara Whitmore, the invisible middle daughter, stood frozen as the most powerful nobleman in the kingdom extended his gloved hand toward her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her mother's face drained of color. Her sisters stared in disbelief. In a world where beauty determined destiny and rank decided everything, the Duke had just shattered every rule of society. But this was only the beginning of a story that would change everything Clara thought she knew about worth, power, and love. If you want to see how the overlooked daughter transforms an entire kingdom, stay with us until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment which city you're watching from. The morning of Eleanor's engagement ball, Clara Whitmore woke to the sound of her mother's voice echoing through Whitmore Manor with military precision. "Eleanor, hold still. The seamstress cannot work miracles if you keep fidgeting." Mrs. Whitmore's tone carried the desperate edge of a general preparing for the most crucial battle of her career. "And Sophie, darling, stop eating those candies. Your dress is already straining at the seams as it is." Clara lay in her narrow bed in the east wing, the quieter, colder section of the house where forgotten things were stored, and listened to the chaos erupting 3 floors below. She had learned long ago that mornings like these did not include her. In the Whitmore household, there were daughters who mattered, and daughters who simply existed. She was the latter. Pushing back the thin coverlet, Clara crossed to the small window that overlooked the estate gardens. Dawn light filtered through ancient oak trees, casting long shadows across the overgrown pathways her father never bothered to maintain. Money, after all, was reserved for the daughters who could attract suitable husbands. Eleanor, with her golden hair and porcelain skin, had secured Lord Hampton, a match that would restore the family's dwindling fortune. Sophie, the youngest at 16, possessed the kind of effortless charm that made grown men stumble over their words. And then there was Clara, 23 years old, too plain to be beautiful, too thoughtful to be charming, too honest to pretend otherwise. "Clara!" Her mother's voice cracked like a whip from somewhere below. "Clara, I know you can hear me. Come down at once." Clara dressed quickly in one of her 3 serviceable gowns, this one a faded gray muslin that had belonged to a cousin who'd died 5 years prior. She braided her dark brown hair without bothering to check the mirror. What was the point? The reflection never changed. Unremarkable brown eyes, a face that inspired neither admiration nor disgust, the kind of features that vanished the moment you looked away, the face of invisibility. She descended the servants' staircase. It was faster and less likely to result in collision with the army of workers transforming Whitmore Manor into a showcase worthy of Eleanor's triumph. The main floors had erupted into barely controlled chaos. Footmen carried enormous flower arrangements. Maids polished silver until it gleamed. The housekeeper barked orders while simultaneously directing the placement of 200 chairs in the grand ballroom. Clara found her mother in Eleanor's dressing room, surrounded by a cloud of silk, lace, and anxiety. Finally, Mrs. Whitmore barely glanced at Clara before returning her attention to Eleanor's hem. "I need you to ride into the village and collect the extra ribbons from Mrs. Patterson. She promised them by yesterday, but of course the woman has proven unreliable as ever. Take the small carriage and be back before noon. We cannot have Eleanor's dress incomplete when Lord Hampton's family arrives." "Yes, mother." Clara had learned not to expect please or thank you. Eleanor caught Clara's eye in the mirror and offered a small apologetic smile. Of the entire family, Eleanor alone treated Clara with kindness, though even that kindness was constrained by their mother's iron rule of hierarchy. In Mrs. Whitmore's world, showing favor to the plain daughter undermined the beautiful one's value. "Oh, and Clara?" Her mother's voice stopped her at the door. "Do try to stay out of sight this evening. We cannot afford any distractions from Eleanor's moment. You understand, don't you, dear?" The endearment stung worse than the dismissal. "Of course, mother, I wouldn't dream of being a distraction." Clara escaped before the tightness in her throat could betray her. The village of Hartfield lay 2 miles from Whitmore Manor, connected by a winding road that passed through rolling farmland and patches of ancient forest. Clara drove the carriage herself. Her father had never seen the point in wasting a driver on errands involving the middle daughter. She didn't mind. These brief escapes from the suffocating atmosphere of home had become her only refuge. The September morning sparkled with the kind of crisp beauty that made everything feel possible. Mist rose from the fields where farmers were already at work. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. Clara breathed deeply, letting the clean air wash away the accumulated weight of years spent being overlooked. She collected the ribbons from Mrs. Patterson, a kind widow who always asked about Clara's reading and actually listened to the answers, and was preparing to return home when she noticed a small crowd gathered outside the village tavern, unusual for a Tuesday morning. Hartfield's population rarely stirred before noon except on market days. "What's happening?" Clara asked Mrs. Patterson, who had followed her out to settle the carriage horse. "Haven't you heard?" The widow's eyes gleamed with the thrill of fresh gossip. "Duke Blackthorn has returned to England. They say he arrived at Blackthorn Hall late last night after 12 years abroad. The entire county is in an uproar." Clara's heart skipped. Everyone in Hampshire knew the story of Duke Adrian Blackthorn, the young nobleman who had inherited his title at age 16 after his parents died in a carriage accident. Devastated by grief, he had fled England immediately after the funeral, leaving his vast estates in the hands of trustees while he traveled the continent. Some said he'd joined the military, others claimed he'd become a scholar in Italy. A few whispered darker tales of heartbreak and tragedy. No one expected him to return. "They say he's completely changed," Mrs. Patterson continued, lowering her voice with delicious conspiracy. "Gone is the grief-stricken boy. In his place stands a man who looks like he's stared down death itself, dark, powerful. They say his eyes could freeze the blood in your veins." "Sounds terrifying," Clara murmured, though something about the description stirred a strange flutter in her chest. "Terrifying and magnificent," Mrs. Patterson agreed. "Every unmarried woman in 3 counties will be throwing themselves at him by week's end. Mark my words, your mother will be revising her plans for Sophie before the day is out." Clara smiled despite herself. "Eleanor's engagement ball is tonight. I doubt Mother will let anything interfere with her triumph." "Ah, but that's just it, dear." Mrs. Patterson's grin turned sly. "Word is, the Duke received an invitation weeks ago when people still thought he'd never return. But now that he's back, well, they say Blackthorn Hall is only 5 miles from your family's estate. Would be terribly rude for him not to make an appearance, wouldn't it?" Clara's stomach dropped. "Surely he won't actually attend. A man like that doesn't concern himself with country assemblies." "Perhaps. Or perhaps he's exactly the kind of man who does what no one expects." Mrs. Patterson patted Clara's arm. "Either way, it should make for an interesting evening. Do give Eleanor my congratulations." Clara returned to Whitmore Manor to find the chaos had intensified to fever pitch. Her mother stood in the entrance hall, clutching a letter with trembling hands while Sophie read over her shoulder. "He's accepted!" Mrs. Whitmore's voice pitched between hysteria and euphoria. "Duke Blackthorn has confirmed his attendance for this evening. Sophie, darling, we must do something about your hair. And your dress. No, that dress won't do at all. We need something that shows sophistication without looking desperate." "Mother, Eleanor's engagement ball is tonight," Sophie interrupted gently. "We can't change my entire ensemble now. Besides, I'm 16. Surely the Duke isn't interested in—" "Nonsense! Youth and beauty are timeless advantages. If we play this correctly—" Mrs. Whitmore's eyes took on the calculating gleam Clara knew too well. It was the expression of a woman rearranging chess pieces on a board where her daughters were pawns. Clara slipped past them, invisible as always, and delivered the ribbons to Eleanor's room. Her eldest sister sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection with an expression that wasn't quite happiness. "You're having doubts," Clara said softly, closing the door behind her. Eleanor's perfect composure cracked just slightly. "Lord Hampton is a good man. The match is advantageous. Mother says I should be grateful." "That's not what I asked." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to be chosen for something other than your face or your family name? To have someone look at you and see you?" Clara's throat tightened. "Every day of my life." "At least you're free," Eleanor said bitterly. "No one expects anything from you. You can disappear into your books and your writing and live whatever life you choose. I'm trapped in this beautiful cage, and the door locks tighter with every compliment." Clara crossed the room and took her sister's hand. You could refuse him and bring ruin on our entire family? Condemn Sophie to spinsterhood? Watch father lose the estate? Eleanor shook her head. No, this is my duty. I knew it from the moment I was born beautiful enough to matter. The resignation in her voice broke Clara's heart. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. Don't be. At least one of us should escape this life. Eleanor squeezed her hand and manufactured a bright smile. Now go. Mother will be insufferable if she catches us being melancholy on my special day. Bob. By 7 o'clock, Whitmore Manor had transformed into something from a fairy tale. Hundreds of candles blazed in crystal chandeliers. Flowers overflowed from every surface. The ballroom gleamed with fresh polish, and the orchestra tuned their instruments in the gallery above. Guests began arriving in a steady stream. The county's finest families, all dressed in their most impressive finery, all eager to witness Eleanor Whitmore's triumph and perhaps catch a glimpse of the mysterious returned Duke. Clara had been dressed by the same maid who handled the linens, a quick, efficient process that resulted in a pale blue gown that had been fashionable 5 years ago. No jewels, no elaborate hairstyle. Just enough effort to avoid embarrassing the family, but not enough to draw attention. Perfect invisibility. She stationed herself in her customary position, a small alcove near the terrace doors where shadows gathered and no one important ever ventured. From there, she could observe the entire ballroom while remaining completely unnoticed. It had become her talent over the years, the art of vanishing in plain sight. Eleanor made her entrance at 8 o'clock to thunderous applause. She looked like an angel descended from heaven, golden hair piled in elaborate curls, a white gown that shimmered with every movement, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. Lord Hampton stood beside her, beaming with pride at his beautiful acquisition. They opened the ball with a waltz that had every mother in the room sighing with envy. Sophie danced every set, her laughter ringing across the ballroom as young men competed for her favor. Mrs. Whitmore held court near the refreshment tables, accepting congratulations with the smug satisfaction of a woman whose careful planning had paid off. And Clara watched it all from the shadows, feeling the familiar ache of being simultaneously present and absent. She had grown used to it over the years, the loneliness that came from being the daughter no one remembered to introduce, the girl no one asked to dance, the woman who existed only to make her sisters shine brighter by comparison. She had almost convinced herself she didn't mind anymore. The ballroom clock struck 9, and the butler's voice rang out with unexpected force. His Grace, the Duke of Blackthorn! Every conversation died instantly. Every head turned toward the entrance. Even the orchestra faltered mid-note. And then he appeared. Duke Adrian Blackthorn entered the ballroom like a storm made flesh, tall and powerfully built, with dark hair swept back from a face that carried the weight of years lived hard and survived against odds. He wore black evening clothes that emphasized the military bearing in his shoulders and the predatory grace in his movements. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, gray as winter steel, sharp enough to dissect souls. This was not the grief-stricken boy who had fled England 12 years ago. This was a man who had walked through fire and emerged forged into something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Mrs. Whitmore practically threw Sophie in his direction. "Your Grace!" Her mother's voice pitched too high, too eager. "What an honor! May I present my youngest daughter, Miss Sophie Whitmore? Such a delightful girl. Accomplished on the pianoforte, beautiful dancer, and Mrs. Whitmore." The Duke's voice cut through the introduction like a blade through silk, low, controlled, and utterly uninterested. He offered a brief bow. "Your daughter is charming, I'm sure. However, I find myself in search of someone else entirely." Confused silence rippled outward. Sophie's face flushed with embarrassment. Mrs. Whitmore looked ready to faint. The Duke's gray eyes swept across the ballroom with methodical precision, as though he were searching for something specific. Clara pressed herself deeper into the shadows, suddenly grateful for her gift of invisibility. Whatever game the Duke was playing, she wanted no part of it. His gaze passed over Eleanor and Lord Hampton, over the clusters of blushing debutantes and their ambitious mothers, over the wealthy merchants and minor nobles who had traveled from London for the event. And then, impossibly, those steel-gray eyes locked directly on Clara. The world tilted sideways. He crossed the ballroom with the focused intensity of a man who had already decided his destination. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow. Whispers erupted in his wake, confused, shocked, disbelieving. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. This had to be a mistake. He couldn't be walking toward her. Men like him didn't notice women like her. It violated the fundamental laws of society. But he didn't stop, didn't hesitate, didn't look away. Duke Adrian Blackthorne stopped directly in front of Clara's alcove and extended one gloved hand toward her. "Miss Clara Whitmore," he said quietly, and his voice carried a strange warmth that contradicted the hardness in his face. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" The ballroom erupted into barely suppressed chaos. Her mother's gasp of horror echoed from across the room. Sophie's mouth fell open. Eleanor looked stunned, every eye in the room fixed on Clara with expressions ranging from confusion to outrage to malicious delight at the spectacle. Clara stared at the offered hand as though it were a viper. "Your Grace," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I believe you've made a mistake. I'm—" "The girl by the stream," he interrupted softly, and something in his expression shifted, the hard edges softening just slightly, as though a door had cracked open to reveal warmth beneath the ice. "The one who told me stories when I needed them most. The one who made me remember what it felt like to hope." Clara's breath caught. The world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them, standing in a bubble of impossible memory. 12 years ago. The summer before his parents died. A grieving boy of 16 sitting alone by the stream that bordered Blackthorne and Whitmore lands, and a lonely 11-year-old girl who had wandered away from her family's picnic to escape yet another conversation about how unfortunate it was that she lacked her sister's beauty. She had found him crying, and instead of running away or offering platitudes, she had sat beside him and begun telling him a story, an elaborate tale of dragons and heroes and magic that she'd invented on the spot. Anything to distract him from whatever grief consumed him. They had talked for hours. He told her about his fear of inheriting his father's title. She'd confessed that she sometimes wished she could disappear entirely. They'd made each other laugh despite the weight both of them carried. And then his parents had died 2 months later, and he'd vanished from England before she could even offer condolences. She'd assumed he'd forgotten, assumed the afternoon had meant nothing to a duke's son, even if it had meant everything to a girl who'd finally felt seen. "You remember," she whispered. "Every word." His hand remained extended. "I've spent 12 years trying to become someone worthy of finding you again. Now I have. So I ask you once more, Miss Clara Whitmore, will you dance with me?" Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to protect herself from the inevitable humiliation when he realized his mistake, when he discovered that the girl by the stream had grown into exactly the kind of woman nobody wanted. The forgotten daughter, the invisible one. But something in his eyes, something steady and certain and absolutely unshakable, made her believe just for a moment that maybe she'd been wrong about everything. Clara placed her hand in his. The ballroom exploded into whispers. Duke Adrian Blackthorne led the invisible daughter onto the dance floor as every rule of society shattered around them, and for the first time in her entire life, Clara Whitmore felt what it was like to be chosen. Not because she was beautiful or charming or useful, but simply because she existed and that existence mattered to someone who had the power to acknowledge it. The waltz began, and the world changed forever. They moved across the floor in perfect synchronization, as though they'd been dancing together for years instead of seconds. The Duke was an excellent dancer, confident, controlled, his movements fluid despite the military precision in his bearing. Clara had learned to waltz only because her mother insisted all daughters master the basics, even the ones who would never be asked to demonstrate the skill. "You're staring at me like I'm going to vanish," he said quietly, his gray eyes holding hers with unsettling intensity. "I'm trying to determine if this is real or if I've finally lost my mind," Clara admitted. "Dukes don't dance with girls like me. Girls like you. Invisible ones, forgotten ones. The daughters nobody notices or remembers." Something sharp and angry flashed across his face. "Then the people around you are fools. Or perhaps they simply see reality," Clara countered, and she was surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. 12 years of invisibility had taught her to face truth without flinching. I'm not beautiful like Eleanor or charming like Sophie. I'm the one they send on errands, the one they forget to introduce at parties, the one who exists to make my sisters look better by comparison. And yet you're the only one in this entire ballroom I wanted to meet. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Raw, desperate, dangerous. Why me? Why now? You could have any woman in England. You could have Eleanor, and our mother would sell her soul to make that match happen. So why are you wasting a dance on the daughter who doesn't matter? The Duke's expression darkened. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Because 12 years ago, when I was drowning in grief and everyone around me offered empty platitudes or predatory sympathy, a strange little girl sat beside me at a stream and told me a story about a dragon who learned that the hardest battles were the ones we fought inside ourselves. She didn't know I was a duke's son. She didn't care about my title or my fortune. She just saw a boy who was hurting and decided he deserved kindness. Clara's eyes stung. She remembered that afternoon with crystalline clarity, the way the sunlight had filtered through the leaves, the sound of the stream bubbling over stones, the desperate loneliness that had driven her to talk to a stranger instead of returning to the family picnic where no one would miss her. That was a child's kindness, she whispered. It doesn't mean... It means everything, he interrupted, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Do you know what I did after my parents died? I ran. I fled England because I couldn't bear to face the responsibility of my inheritance. I spent 12 years traveling the world, trying to outrun grief and guilt. And whenever the darkness threatened to consume me, I remembered the girl by the stream, the one who looked at me and saw something worth saving. I was 11 years old. I told you a fairy tale. You gave me hope when I had none. You reminded me that kindness still existed in a world that suddenly felt like nothing but cruelty. The waltz spun them through a turn, and the ballroom blurred around them. I spent years trying to find you. I wrote to every family in Hampshire with daughters the right age. I described you to dozens of people. No one remembered a dark-haired girl who told stories. It was as though you'd vanished into thin air. Because no one notices me, Clara said simply. They never have. Then they're blind. The Duke's voice dropped to something almost fierce. I've spent the evening watching you stand in the shadows, observing everything, seeing everything. Do you know what I saw? A woman with more intelligence and perception in her silence than most people achieve in a lifetime of shouting. A woman who doesn't need to sparkle and preen because her strength runs deeper than surface shine. Clara's throat closed. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her like this, as though she were something precious instead of something to be tolerated. You don't know me, she managed. That girl by the stream grew up. She became exactly what her family always knew she'd be, the daughter who doesn't fit anywhere, the spinster who reads too much and talks too little, the one everyone wishes would just disappear so they can focus on the daughters who matter. Then your family are the greatest fools I've ever encountered. The waltz ended, but the Duke didn't release her hand. And if you'll permit me, I intend to prove to every single one of them that they were wrong. Before Clara could respond, her mother descended on them like an avenging angel, her face a mask of carefully controlled panic. Your Grace! What a delightful surprise! Mrs. Whitmore's laugh sounded strangled. I do apologize for the confusion. I'm certain you meant to request a dance with Eleanor or Sophie. Clara wouldn't dream of presuming Mrs. Whitmore. The Duke's voice turned to ice. I asked Miss Clara Whitmore to dance because she is the only woman in this ballroom I had any interest in dancing with. There was no confusion, no mistake. If anything, the presumption was mine, that she would be kind enough to grant me the honor despite my 12-year absence. Mrs. Whitmore's face cycled through confusion, horror, and calculating ambition in rapid succession. Yes, of course, Your Grace. How unexpected. Clara is such a quiet girl, we sometimes forget she's even... Then perhaps you should look more carefully at your own daughter, the Duke said coldly, because I assure you, the rest of England will be watching her very closely from now on. He turned back to Clara and executed a perfect bow. Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitmore. I hope you'll permit me to call on you tomorrow afternoon. I find I have years of conversation to catch up on. And then, while the entire ballroom stared in shocked silence, Duke Adrian Blackthorne walked away, leaving Clara standing frozen in the center of the dance floor, with her mother hissing frantic whispers and her entire world turned upside down. Eleanor appeared at her elbow, gripping her arm with surprising strength. "Clara," she whispered urgently, "what just happened?" "I have no idea," Clara breathed. "I think I'm dreaming." "If this is a dream, we're both having it. He just announced his intention to court you in front of everyone who matters in 3 counties. Eleanor's eyes were wide with something between amazement and terror. Mother looks ready to either faint or explode. Sophie can't stop staring, and Lord Hampton's mother is watching you like you've just stolen the crown jewels. Clara's stomach dropped. This is going to be a disaster. Maybe. Eleanor squeezed her arm. Or maybe it's exactly what you deserve, someone who sees you instead of looking through you. But as Clara watched the whispers ripple through the ballroom, saw the calculating looks and the jealous glares and the malicious speculation, she couldn't shake the terrible certainty that she'd just stepped onto a battlefield she had no idea how to navigate. The invisible daughter had just been thrust into the spotlight, and she had no idea whether she would survive it. Dimab. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of confusion and barely suppressed scandal. Clara retreated to her shadows as quickly as possible, but the damage was done. Every eye in the ballroom tracked her movements. Every whisper carried her name. The women who had ignored her existence for 23 years suddenly studied her with venomous intensity, as though trying to decipher what dark magic she'd used to enchant a duke. Sophie found her hiding near the terrace doors around midnight, long after most guests had departed and the orchestra had packed away their instruments. Mother is having hysterics, Sophie announced cheerfully, dropping onto the bench beside Clara with the graceless confidence of 16. She's convinced you've somehow ruined Eleanor's engagement ball, though honestly, I think Eleanor is relieved to share the attention. Lord Hampton's mother spent the entire evening lecturing Mother about propriety and social climbing, which was magnificent to witness. I'm going to be sick, Clara murmured. Don't be ridiculous. You're going to be a duchess. Sophie grinned at Clara's expression of horror. What? Did you think the Duke of Blackthorn announces his intention to court someone in front of all of society and then changes his mind? He might as well have published your engagement in the London Times. He doesn't know me. Not really. He remembers a child who told him stories. That's not the same as… Clara. Sophie's voice turned surprisingly serious. I've watched every man in 3 counties look through you as though you were made of glass. Tonight, the most powerful nobleman in England looked at you like you were the only person in the room who mattered. Don't you dare talk yourself out of believing that means something. Tears burned behind Clara's eyes. I don't know how to be the woman he thinks I am. Then maybe you don't have to be. Maybe you just have to be you. Sophie stood and pressed a quick kiss to Clara's forehead. Get some rest. Something tells me tomorrow is going to be very interesting. Clara didn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed in the east wing and watched dawn break over the gardens, trying to make sense of a world that had shifted beneath her feet. In the space of one dance, she had gone from invisible to notorious, from forgotten to watched, from safe in the shadows to exposed in the harsh light of society's judgment. And the most terrifying part was the tiny, treacherous spark of hope that had ignited in her chest. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about everything. That maybe someone could see her and still choose her. That maybe being overlooked hadn't been fate but merely circumstance. That maybe she was worth something after all. At 10 o'clock, the butler knocked on her door with a message that made her heart stop. Duke Blackthorn had arrived and was requesting her presence in the drawing room. He'd actually come. Clara dressed with shaking hands in her best day dress, which was still 3 years out of fashion, and descended the stairs to find her entire family gathered in the drawing room like soldiers preparing for battle. Her mother sat rigid with forced composure. Her father stood by the window, looking confused and slightly overwhelmed. Eleanor and Sophie flanked their mother, both watching Clara with expressions she couldn't quite read. And in the center of it all stood Duke Adrian Blackthorn, looking exactly as dangerous and compelling as he had the night before, watching her descend the stairs with those sharp gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her. Miss Whitmore, he said quietly, and somehow his voice cut through the tension like a knife. Thank you for seeing me. Clara's mouth went dry. Your Grace. I've asked your father for permission to court you formally, he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. He's granted it, though I suspect your mother has reservations. Reservations? Mrs. Whitmore's composure finally cracked. Your Grace, with all due respect, surely there's been some misunderstanding. Clara is a dear girl, of course, but hardly the sort of woman a man of your position. Mrs. Whitmore, the Duke's voice could have frozen steel. I understand that you've spent years training your daughters to attract suitable husbands. I understand that you've measured their worth by their beauty and their ability to charm, but I am not a man who chooses his companions based on surface qualities. I choose based on substance, and your daughter Clara has more substance than any woman I've ever met. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. I intend to court her properly, the Duke continued. With your permission, I'd like to call on her regularly. Take her driving, introduce her to my family and friends. Allow society to see what I see, that she is extraordinary. Clara found her voice, though it came out smaller than she'd intended. Why? He turned to her, and the hardness in his expression softened into something almost gentle. Because 12 years ago you saved me without even knowing it. And I would very much like the opportunity to know the woman you've become. If you'll let me. Every logical part of Clara's mind screamed at her to refuse, to protect herself from the inevitable moment when he realized his mistake, to retreat to the safety of invisibility before the fall destroyed her completely. But that tiny spark of hope, treacherous, dangerous, irresistible, made her voice steady when she spoke. I'd like that, Your Grace. His smile transformed his entire face, and for just a moment, Clara caught a glimpse of the grieving boy she'd met by the stream, still there beneath the layers of steel, waiting for someone to see him too. Then let's begin, Duke Adrian Blackthorne said, extending his hand toward the forgotten daughter who was about to discover that being seen was both the most terrifying and the most wonderful thing that had ever happened to her. The invisible daughter's story had finally begun, and the whole world was about to watch what happened when someone decided she mattered. The gossip reached London before Clara had even finished breakfast the next morning. Mrs. Whitmore burst into the dining room waving a letter like a battle standard, her face flushed with equal parts triumph and terror. Lady Pemberton has written from town. She says the entire city is talking about the Duke's return and his inexplicable interest in our Clara. She's invited us to her salon next week, all of us. She specifically mentioned that she's eager to meet the young woman who has captured such distinguished attention. Clara's teacup rattled against its saucer. Mother, I don't think... Of course we're going, Mrs. Whitmore continued, already mentally rearranging her social calendar. This is an opportunity we cannot squander, though we'll need new dresses, Clara especially. We cannot have the Duke's chosen looking like a country mouse among London society. His chosen, Clara repeated hollowly. Mother, he's called on me exactly once. That doesn't make me... He's called on you 3 times in the past week, Eleanor corrected gently from across the table. And he's sent flowers every morning. And yesterday he brought you that first edition of poetry you mentioned wanting, and he's taking you driving this afternoon. Again. Sophie grinned over her toast. At this rate, he'll propose by Christmas. The panic that had been simmering in Clara's chest for 7 days finally boiled over. This is madness, all of it. He doesn't know me. Not really. He remembers a child who told him stories, and he's built some fantasy in his head about who I am. When he realizes I'm just me, this entire charade will collapse, and everyone will laugh about how the invisible daughter dared to dream above her station. Silence fell across the breakfast table. Even Mrs. Whitmore looked momentarily uncertain. Clara. Eleanor's voice carried a gentleness that made Clara's eyes sting. What if he already knows exactly who you are, and that's precisely why he keeps coming back? Before Clara could respond, the butler appeared in the doorway. Miss Clara, His Grace the Duke of Blackthorne has arrived for your afternoon drive. Clara's heart lurched. He's early. By an hour, the butler confirmed with the faintest hint of amusement in his professional demeanor. Shall I tell him you need time to prepare? No. Clara stood on shaking legs, smoothing down her new day dress, pale green muslin that her mother had commissioned in a frenzy of anxious preparation. I'll meet him in the entrance hall. She descended the stairs to find Adrian examining the faded portraits that lined the Whitmore hallway, generations of ancestors whose eyes seemed to judge every person who passed beneath them. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and his expression shifted from distant contemplation to something warmer. "Miss Whitmore." He bowed. "Forgive my early arrival. I found myself impatient." Impatient to spend time with the most talked about scandal in 3 counties? Clara couldn't quite keep the edge from her voice. Adrian's gray eyes sharpened. "Impatient to spend time with the only person in 3 counties whose conversation I actually enjoy. There's a difference." "Is there?" Clara descended the final steps and stopped just out of his reach, studying his face for signs of deception or delusion. "Your Grace, I need to know something, and I need you to answer honestly. Always. Why are you doing this?" The question burst out raw and desperate. You could court anyone. You could have Eleanor or Sophie or any of the celebrated beauties who've been throwing themselves at you since you returned. Instead, you're courting the daughter everyone considers a spinster. The plain one. The forgettable one. So I need to understand, is this some elaborate revenge against society? A wager you've made with friends? A moment of nostalgia you'll regret once the novelty wears off? Adrian's expression darkened dangerously. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Do you know what I learned in 12 years abroad, Miss Whitmore? I learned that beauty fades and charm grows tiresome, but intelligence and integrity are forever rare. I learned that most people wear masks so carefully crafted they forget their own faces underneath. And I learned that I would rather spend 1 hour with someone genuine than a lifetime with someone performing." He took a step closer, and Clara had to fight the urge to retreat. "You are not plain," he continued, each word precise as a blade. "You are not forgettable. You are sharp and perceptive and brutally honest in a world that drowns in polite lies. You see through pretense because you've never been allowed to hide behind it. And that makes you dangerous to every fool in society who's built their entire identity on surface shine." Clara's breath caught. "You don't know what you're asking for. The moment you make this official, the moment you propose, if you propose, you'll condemn yourself to a lifetime with a woman who doesn't fit anywhere, who can't charm your political allies or dazzle your society friends, who will always be the wife everyone whispers about, wondering what you saw in her." "Then let them wonder." Adrian's voice dropped to something almost fierce. "I spent 12 years running from responsibility and grief. I'm done running. I know what I want, Clara. The question is, do you have the courage to believe you might deserve it?" The use of her Christian name should have felt presumptuous. Instead, it felt like a promise. Clara stared at him, searching for cracks in his certainty, for the inevitable moment when he'd realize his mistake. But his gray eyes held nothing but steady resolve and something that looked dangerously like affection. "I don't know," she whispered honestly. "I don't know if I'm brave enough." "Then let me be brave for both of us until you learn." He offered his arm. "Now, shall we scandalize the neighborhood by driving through the village together? I've heard the fastest way to stop gossip is to give them something undeniable to gossip about." Despite everything, Clara laughed. She took his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine fabric of his coat, and let him lead her toward the curricle waiting outside. She didn't see her mother watching from the upstairs window, calculating odds and revising strategies. Didn't notice Eleanor's wistful expression or Sophie's delighted grin. Didn't realize that in the village below, Mrs. Patterson was already spreading word that the Duke and Miss Clara Whitmore were driving together again, and wasn't it becoming quite serious? All Clara knew was that for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her deliberately and refused to be talked out of it. And the terror of that realization was matched only by the wild, impossible hope beginning to bloom in her chest. The drive through Hartfield Village was exactly the spectacle Adrian had predicted. Every person they passed stopped to stare. Shopkeepers abandoned their customers to watch from doorways. Women clutched each other's arms and whispered behind gloved hands. Even the vicar, normally the soul of discretion, stood frozen on the church steps with his mouth slightly agape. "They're staring," Clara murmured, her hands knotted in her lap. "Let them." Adrian guided the horses with easy confidence, seemingly unbothered by the attention. "By tomorrow, every drawing room in Hampshire will be discussing whether I've lost my mind or discovered some hidden quality in you that they missed. Either way, you'll be the most talked about woman in the county. That's supposed to comfort me? It's supposed to prepare you. He glanced at her, his expression serious. Society is about to turn its full attention on you, Clara. Every woman who wanted to be Duchess will be looking for ways to tear you down. Every gossip will be inventing stories about how you trapped me. Every self-proclaimed expert on propriety will be cataloging your flaws and broadcasting them as evidence of my poor judgment. Clara's stomach churned. You paint such an appealing picture. I paint an honest one. Adrian slowed the curricle as they approached the edge of the village. I need you to understand what you're walking into. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a battlefield, and the weapons are whispers. Then why put me through it? Clara turned to face him directly. Why not just let me be? Find someone better suited to— Because I'm tired of pretending, Adrian interrupted, and there was something raw in his voice that made Clara's breath catch. I'm tired of playing the games society demands. I'm tired of measuring my worth by bloodlines and bank accounts, and I'm tired of being surrounded by people who want the Duke but have no interest in the man. He pulled the horses to a stop beside the same stream where they'd met 12 years ago. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun, burbling over smooth stones exactly as Clara remembered. When I found you again, Adrian continued quietly, standing in the shadows at your sister's ball, watching everything with those perceptive eyes, I realized I'd spent 12 years searching for someone who saw through the title and the fortune to the person underneath, someone who didn't want something from me, someone who was just real. Clara swallowed hard. That's a lot of weight to put on a woman you barely know. Then help me know you. Adrian turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. Tell me what you're afraid of, what you dream about, what you think when you're alone in that East Wing bedroom your family seems to have forgotten exists. The invitation hung between them, dangerous and tempting. Clara had spent 23 years being invisible, protecting herself by never revealing too much, never expecting anyone to care enough to ask. The habit of silence was bone deep, but something in Adrian's expression, something open and genuinely curious, made her want to try. I'm afraid, she said slowly, that I've spent so long being overlooked that I've become hollow. That there's nothing inside me except books and stories and secondhand dreams. I'm afraid that when you finally see past the novelty of courting an unconventional choice, you'll realize I'm exactly what everyone always said, unremarkable. And what do you dream about? Clara surprised herself by laughing. You're going to think it's foolish. Try me. She took a breath. I dream about writing stories, real stories, the kind people might actually read. I dream about having a library of my own, filled with books and languages I taught myself to read. I dream about conversations that matter instead of empty social pleasantries. And I dream about— She hesitated, vulnerability making her voice small. About someone looking at me the way you looked at Eleanor at the ball, before you realized it wasn't her you wanted to dance with. Adrian's expression softened. You mean like I was seeing something precious? Like I was seeing someone real, Clara corrected. Someone who existed beyond just being beautiful or useful. Someone who mattered. Clara. Adrian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tilted her chin up until she had to meet his eyes. You matter. Not because I'm courting you, not because society is suddenly paying attention. You matter because you exist, and you think, and you feel, and you have the courage to be honest in a world built on pretty lies. And anyone who can't see that is blind. Tears burned behind Clara's eyes. You barely know me. Then I look forward to spending a lifetime learning more. His thumb brushed her cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. If you'll let me. The moment stretched between them, fragile and significant. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this wasn't just nostalgia or novelty or some elaborate delusion, but years of being dismissed had taught her to protect her hope carefully. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the intimacy. Adrian pulled back, his expression shuddering into cool politeness as 3 riders came into view around the bend. Clara recognized them immediately. Lord Ashford and his 2 younger brothers, all members of the most influential family in the county after the Duke himself. They reined in their horses with identical expressions of surprise that didn't quite mask their calculation. "Blackthorn," Lord Ashford boomed with false cheer. "Didn't expect to find you out here. We heard you'd been occupied lately. Thought the rumors were exaggerated." "Ashford." Adrian's voice could have frozen fire. "I see gossip travels faster than ever." "Can't help what people talk about." Ashford's gaze slid to Clara with barely concealed disdain. "Miss Whitmore, isn't it? The middle daughter. Heard you've been monopolizing the Duke's time, quite the accomplishment for a girl who usually goes unnoticed." The insult hit exactly where it was designed to hurt. Clara felt herself shrinking back into old patterns of invisibility, becoming smaller and quieter and less present. But Adrian's hand found hers, squeezing once with firm reassurance. "Miss Whitmore has been gracious enough to tolerate my company," Adrian said coldly. "I count myself fortunate. She's the most intelligent woman I've met in England, and certainly the only one whose conversation I seek out deliberately." Ashford's smile turned nasty. Intelligence. How unconventional. Though I suppose when a man's been abroad for 12 years, he might develop unusual tastes. My sister was asking after you just yesterday. Lady Catherine remembers you quite well from before you left. Beautiful girl. Accomplished. Everything one expects in a duchess. The implication hung heavy in the air, unlike the unremarkable woman currently sitting beside you. "Lady Catherine is very kind," Adrian replied with lethal politeness. "Please give her my regards and inform her that my courtship is quite firmly established. I wouldn't want anyone laboring under false hope." "Courtship." Ashford's laugh was ugly. "Come now, Blackthorn. Surely you're not serious about—" He caught himself, but the damage was done. Clara felt the words like a physical blow. "Surely you're not serious about her." The unspoken continuation echoed in her mind, about someone so ordinary, so beneath you, so unworthy. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Adrian's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Miss Whitmore has done me the honor of allowing me to court her. I suggest you show appropriate respect to the woman who will very likely become the next Duchess of Blackthorn." Silence crashed down like a guillotine. Ashford's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and barely suppressed fury. His brothers exchanged glances that promised this conversation would be repeated in every drawing room in London by week's end. "I see," Ashford finally managed, his voice tight. "Well, that is unexpected. I'm sure society will have much to say about such an unconventional choice." "Society can say whatever it likes." Adrian gathered the reins with one hand while keeping the other firmly holding Clara's. "My choice is made. The question is whether society has the wisdom to accept it gracefully or the foolishness to make themselves ridiculous by questioning it." He didn't wait for a response. With a curt nod, Adrian urged the horses forward, leaving the Ashford brothers staring after them in stunned silence. Clara didn't speak until they were well out of earshot. "You just made enemies." "I made my position clear," Adrian corrected. "There's a difference. They'll tell everyone. By tomorrow, all of London will know you're serious about courting me, and they'll tear me apart for it." "Let them try." Adrian's jaw set with determination. "Clara, I need you to understand something. I didn't return to England to play society's games. I didn't spend 12 years learning who I am just to let small-minded gossips dictate my choices. If people can't accept that I value substance over surface beauty, that's their limitation, not ours. But your reputation is my own to manage." He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "I know what I'm asking of you. I know you're about to become the subject of vicious speculation and cruel judgment. But I also know that you're stronger than you believe. You've survived 23 years of being overlooked. You'll survive being seen." Clara wanted to believe him, but the fear that had been building since the night of the ball finally crystallized into words. "What if I'm not enough? What if you wake up one morning and realize you've tied yourself to a woman who can't give you what you need?" Adrian pulled the curricle to a stop and turned to face her fully. "Clara, look at me." She did, though it cost her. "I don't need a decoration," Adrian said quietly. "I don't need a woman who knows how to curtsy perfectly, or laugh at unfunny jokes, or charm my political rivals. I need a partner, someone who challenges me, someone real. And I found her standing in the shadows at a ball, seeing everything and judging nothing, brave enough to be invisible in a world that demands constant performance. His hand cupped her cheek with devastating gentleness. You are enough, exactly as you are. The question isn't whether you're sufficient for me, it's whether I can become worthy of you. The sincerity in his eyes broke something open in Clara's chest. Before she could think better of it, before fear could stop her, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was brief and awkward and absolutely terrifying. Adrian froze for half a heartbeat. Then his hand slid into her hair and he kissed her back with a careful intensity that made Clara's entire world tilt sideways. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, Adrian's smile transformed his entire face. That, he said quietly, was worth waiting 12 years for. Clara laughed despite the tears streaming down her face. I've never kissed anyone before. I have no idea if I did it right. You did it perfectly. Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. And if society has a problem with the Duke of Blackthorn kissing his future wife beside a stream in Hampshire, they're welcome to take it up with me directly. Future wife. The words hung between them like a promise and a threat, and a hope too fragile to examine closely. Take me home, Clara whispered, before I lose my nerve entirely. Adrian kissed her once more, quick and sweet and full of unspoken promises, then gathered the reins and guided them back toward Whitmore Manor. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the tree line. Didn't see the rider spur his horse toward London with news that would set the entire aristocracy ablaze with speculation and scandal. The invisible daughter had just kissed a duke in broad daylight, and the whispering world was about to become a roaring tempest. The storm broke 3 days later. Clara woke to find her mother standing at the foot of her bed, holding a newspaper with shaking hands and an expression caught between horror and rage. What have you done? Mrs. Whitmore's voice trembled. What in heaven's name have you done? Clara sat up, confusion giving way to dread. Mother, I don't... Mrs. Whitmore threw the newspaper onto the bed. Read it. Read what they're saying about you, about us, about this entire family. Clara picked up the paper with numb fingers. The gossip column dominated the front page, and her own name leaped out from the text like an accusation. Society remains perplexed by the Duke of Blackthorn's inexplicable attachment to Miss C.W., the unremarkable middle daughter of a minor Hampshire family. Sources report that His Grace was observed in a compromising embrace with the young woman in a shockingly public display that has left many questioning his judgment. While some attribute this bizarre courtship to grief-induced delusion following his parents' tragic deaths, others whisper of more calculated motives. Could the clever Miss W. have somehow entrapped England's most eligible bachelor? One must wonder what hold she possesses over a man who could have his choice of the kingdom's finest beauties. Lady Catherine A., longtime friend of the Duke, was seen in tears upon hearing the news. I simply cannot understand it, she confided to this reporter. He deserves someone worthy of his position, someone who can be a true duchess. Indeed, one must question whether a girl known primarily for her invisibility in society can possibly rise to the demands of such an elevated role. Time, as always, will tell if this ill-advised attachment ends in regret. The words blurred as tears filled Clara's eyes. She'd known the gossip would be bad. She hadn't realized it would be devastating. They're calling you a schemer, Mrs. Whitmore continued, her voice rising. They're suggesting you've used some kind of manipulation to trap the Duke. They're saying you're unworthy, that you'll embarrass the family, that you'll ruin Eleanor's chances of moving in higher circles now that she's married. Do you understand what you've done? Do you understand that your selfish pursuit of attention has destroyed this family's reputation? I didn't pursue anything, Clara whispered. He came to me. He chose nonsense. Men like that don't choose girls like you unless they've been cleverly maneuvered into it. Mrs. Whitmore paced the small room like a caged animal. Everyone knows it. Everyone is talking about it. Mrs. Ashford cut me dead at the draper's shop yesterday. Mrs. Patterson, who's been our friend for 20 years, wouldn't meet my eyes. Even the vicar seemed uncomfortable during Sunday service. Then maybe you should have raised me to be invisible properly, Clara shot back, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. Maybe you should have taught me to disappear completely instead of just enough to be convenient. Mrs. Whitmore's hand cracked across Clara's cheek before either of them realized she'd moved. The room fell into shocked silence. I have spent 23 years managing this family's position in society, Mrs. Whitmore said coldly. I have sacrificed and planned and worked to ensure that my daughters would make advantageous matches. Eleanor fulfilled her duty. Sophie would have done the same, but you had to ruin everything by attracting attention you have no ability to handle. And now we're all paying the price. Clara touched her stinging cheek, feeling something crack inside her chest. You're right. I should have stayed invisible. Should have accepted my place as the daughter who doesn't matter. Should have spent my entire life grateful for the privilege of being tolerated. How dare I believe I might deserve something more? Clara. Get out. Clara's voice dropped to something cold and final. Get out of my room. Mrs. Whitmore stared at her, seemingly shocked by the transformation. Then she turned on her heel and left without another word, taking the newspaper with her. Clara sat in the empty silence of her room, holding her burning cheek and feeling the full weight of what she'd unleashed crash down around her. Adrian had warned her. He'd told her exactly what would happen. But knowing intellectually that society would judge her was different from experiencing the reality of their vicious contempt. She was the unremarkable daughter who had dared to reach above her station, the invisible girl who had somehow bewitched a duke, the scheming opportunist who would never be worthy no matter how hard she tried. And the worst part, the truly devastating part, was the tiny voice in her own head that whispered, maybe they're right. A knock on the door interrupted her spiral into despair. Eleanor entered without waiting for permission, her face tight with concern. I heard Mother, Eleanor said quietly, closing the door behind her. I heard everything. Then you know I've destroyed us all, Clara said hollowly. No. Eleanor crossed the room and sat beside Clara on the narrow bed. I know that Mother is terrified. I know that society is cruel. And I know that you're about to make a choice that will define the rest of your life. Clara looked at her sister. What choice? Whether to believe them or believe him. Eleanor took Clara's hand. Whether to let their whispers convince you that you're unworthy, or to trust that a man who spent 12 years searching for something real might actually have found it. But what if they're right? The words tore out of Clara like a confession. What if I'm not enough? What if I embarrass him? What if you're exactly what he needs? Eleanor interrupted gently. Clara, I've watched you for 23 years. I've seen you survive being overlooked and dismissed and treated as though your existence barely mattered. And I've seen you remain kind and honest and genuine despite all of it. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary strength. Clara's throat closed. I'm scared. Then be scared and brave at the same time. Eleanor squeezed her hand. The Duke is coming to call this afternoon. He sent word an hour ago. When he arrives, you can either let Mother's fear and society's cruelty convince you to retreat, or you can decide that you deserve to be chosen, that you deserve to be seen. I don't know if I can. Yes, you do. Eleanor's smile was sad and knowing. Because you already have. The moment you kissed him, you chose courage over safety. The moment you let yourself hope, you became dangerous to everyone who profits from women believing they're not enough. Don't let them win by talking you into invisibility again. Before Clara could respond, Sophie burst through the door with characteristically poor timing and excellent instincts. He's here, Sophie announced breathlessly. The Duke just arrived, and he looks absolutely furious. Mother tried to intercept him, but he walked past her like she wasn't even there and demanded to see Clara immediately. It's magnificent. The footmen don't know whether to be terrified or impressed. Clara's heart hammered. I can't see him. Not like this. Not when I can't hide forever, Eleanor finished, standing and pulling Clara to her feet. Go, face him. Let him see you, really see you, and then decide if you're brave enough to believe he means what he says. Sophie grabbed Clara's other arm, and together they propelled her toward the door before she could retreat into the safety of invisibility. For what it's worth, Sophie whispered as they reached the stairs, I think you're the bravest person I know, and anyone who can't see that is an idiot. Clara descended the stairs on shaking legs to find Adrian standing in the entrance hall with his back to her, radiating barely contained fury. He'd clearly ridden hard. His coat was dusty and his hair disheveled, nothing like the polished duke who'd called on her before. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Not anger at her, anger for her. Protective and fierce and absolutely unshakable. "They wrote about you," he said without preamble, his voice low and dangerous. "They published vicious lies and cruel speculation, and they did it knowing exactly how much damage it would cause. I've spent the morning visiting every gossip columnist and society editor in London, making it very clear that anyone who prints another word against you will face the full weight of my displeasure. Several have already printed retractions." Clara stared at him. "You... what?" "I told you I would be brave for both of us until you learned." Adrian closed the distance between them, his gray eyes blazing. "I meant it. They don't get to tear you down. They don't get to make you doubt your worth. And they certainly don't get to drive you away from me with whispers." Adrian, the use of his given name felt like claiming something precious. "They're saying I've trapped you, that I'm unworthy, that..." "They're terrified," he interrupted, "because you represent everything they can't control. You weren't raised to play their games. You don't know how to simper and scheme. You're honest in a world built on manipulation, and that makes you dangerous to everyone who's built their power on pretty lies and surface charm." He cupped her face in both hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "So they're trying to destroy you before you can prove that genuine worth matters more than bloodlines and beauty. Before other women realize they don't have to perform to be valuable. Before the whole rotten system cracks under the weight of one honest woman refusing to apologize for existing." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "I don't know how to be what you need. You already are." Adrian's thumb brushed away her tears. "Clara, I am going to ask your father for permission to marry you. Today. Right now. And then I'm going to announce our engagement in every newspaper in England, and society can either accept it gracefully or make fools of themselves trying to fight it." Clara's world tilted. "You're proposing." "I'm claiming you before anyone can convince you that you're not worth claiming." His voice dropped to something raw and honest. 12 years ago, a lonely girl sat beside me and gave me hope when I had none. Now I'm asking her to marry me so I can spend the rest of my life trying to repay that gift. Will you, Clara? Will you be brave enough to say yes?" Every logical part of Clara's mind screamed warnings. It was too fast, too public, too dangerous. Marrying him meant stepping permanently into the harsh light of society's judgment, meant becoming the Duchess everyone would whisper about and criticize and compare to worthier women. But it also meant choosing to believe that she mattered, that someone saw her, really saw her, and decided she was worth fighting for. Clara took a shaking breath and made the most terrifying choice of her life. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Adrian's fierce expression cracked into something that looked dangerously like joy. He kissed her there in the entrance hall, in full view of her shocked family and scandalized servants, with the kind of desperate intensity that promised he meant every word he'd said. When they finally pulled apart, Clara saw her father standing frozen in the doorway to his study, her mother clutching the banister on the stairs, and both her sisters beaming from the landing above. "Mr. Whitmore," Adrian said, turning to face Clara's father with her hand firmly in his. "I'm asking permission to marry your daughter. I promise you I will spend every day of my life ensuring she never doubts her worth again." Clara's father blinked several times, clearly overwhelmed. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I suppose, if Clara agrees, I can hardly object to a duke." "She does agree," Adrian confirmed, squeezing Clara's hand. "And now all of England is going to learn that the invisible daughter just became the most important woman in the kingdom. Mrs. Whitmore made a strangled sound from the stairs. Whether protest or capitulation, Clara couldn't tell. But she didn't care. Because for the first time in her entire life, Clara Whitmore had been chosen deliberately and publicly, and the man who'd chosen her was prepared to face down the entire aristocracy to keep her. The whispering world could say whatever it wanted. She wasn't invisible anymore. The engagement announcement appeared in the London Times the next morning, printed in bold letters that left no room for misinterpretation. His Grace the Duke of Blackthorn is pleased to announce his betrothal to Miss Clara Whitmore of Hampshire. The wedding will take place in 6 weeks at Blackthorn Hall. 6 weeks. Not the customary year-long engagement that allowed society to dissect every detail and find reasons to object. Not even the more modest 3 months that propriety demanded. 6 weeks. Barely enough time to have the banns read and a dress made. It was a declaration of war. Clara stood in the Whitmore drawing room staring at the newspaper while chaos erupted around her. Her mother had taken to her bed with smelling salts and dire predictions of social ruin. Her father had retreated to his study with a bottle of brandy, muttering about dukes and hasty decisions. Even Eleanor looked worried, though she tried to hide it behind congratulatory smiles. 6 weeks, Sophie breathed, reading over Clara's shoulder. He's not giving them time to stop it. That's brilliant. That's absolutely insane, Mrs. Whitmore's voice cut through from the doorway, where she'd apparently recovered enough to resume her campaign of terror. It's insane and improper and exactly the kind of reckless behavior that will cement everyone's belief that you've somehow compromised him into this marriage. Claire's hands tightened on the newspaper. I haven't compromised anyone. Then why the rush? Her mother advanced into the room like an avenging angel. Why not wait a proper amount of time? Why not allow society to grow accustomed to the idea? Unless, of course, there's some reason for haste that you haven't disclosed. The implication hung heavy in the air. Clara felt her face burn with humiliation and rage. Mother, Eleanor gasped, how dare you suggest— I dare, because I'm the one who will have to face Lady Ashford and Mrs. Pemberton and every gossip in 3 counties when they ask the same question. Mrs. Whitmore's voice pitched toward hysteria. Do you know what they're saying? Do you have any idea the speculation that's running rampant? They're saying you must be with child, that the Duke discovered some scandal we've been hiding, that he's lost his mind from grief and you've taken advantage of his diminished capacity. Enough! Clara's voice came out cold and hard, surprising everyone, including herself. I understand that my engagement embarrasses you. I understand that you'd prefer I'd remained invisible so that Eleanor and Sophie could continue to shine without my inconvenient existence casting shadows. But I'm going to marry the Duke of Blackthorn in 6 weeks, and you can either support me or spend the rest of your life explaining to society why you're not attending your own daughter's wedding. Mrs. Whitmore's face went white. You ungrateful! I'm not ungrateful. I'm tired. Clara stood, feeling something shift inside her chest. Years of accumulated silence finally crystallizing into words. I'm tired of apologizing for existing. I'm tired of making myself smaller so everyone else feels bigger. And I'm tired of pretending that being overlooked was somehow my fault instead of your choice. She crossed to the door, then paused and turned back. Adrian loves me, not because I trapped him or manipulated him or offered something scandalous, but because I'm honest in a world that taught him everyone lies. If you can't understand that, then perhaps you're exactly the kind of person he was right to leave behind 12 years ago. Clara walked out before her mother could respond, her heart hammering and her hands shaking with the aftershocks of defiance. She found Sophie waiting in the hallway, grinning with fierce pride. That was magnificent. That was terrifying, Clara corrected, but she couldn't quite suppress her own smile. Same thing, really. Sophie linked arms with her. Now come on. The Duke sent word he's taking you to London today. Something about meeting his grandmother and facing down society before they can organize proper resistance. You'll need to pack. Clara's momentary courage evaporated. His grandmother? The Dowager Duchess of Blackthorn. Sophie's eyes gleamed with mischief. They say she's the most formidable woman in England. Rumor has it she once made the Prince Regent apologize for being rude to a servant. If you can survive her, you can survive anything. Wonderful, Clara muttered. From invisible to scrutinized by the most terrifying woman in the kingdom. What could possibly go wrong? Yeah. The journey to London took 4 hours in Adrian's well-sprung carriage. He'd insisted on accompanying her despite the impropriety, brushing aside her mother's protests with the kind of ducal authority that brooked no argument. Now they sat across from each other in the plush interior, and Clara couldn't stop her knee from bouncing with nervous energy. She's going to hate me, Clara said for the 5th time. She's going to be fascinated by you, Adrian corrected for the 5th time. My grandmother respects exactly two things: brutal honesty and refusal to be intimidated. You possess both in abundance. I possess neither. I'm terrified, and I've spent my entire life being intimidated. And yet you just told your mother to support you or stay home from your wedding. Adrian's smile was warm. That's not the behavior of someone who intimidates easily. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, watching the countryside blur past. I don't know who I'm becoming. The old Clara would never have spoken to her mother like that. Would never have agreed to marry someone after 2 weeks. Would never have kissed a duke beside a stream in broad daylight. Maybe the old Clara was just the version of yourself you thought you had to be to survive. Adrian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gray eyes serious. And maybe the woman you're becoming is who you've always been underneath, just finally given permission to exist. Clara looked at him, this man who'd turned her entire world sideways, and felt the familiar flutter of disbelieving hope. What if your grandmother takes one look at me and convinces you that you've made a terrible mistake? Impossible. Adrian, Clara. He reached across and took her hand. My grandmother once told me that the measure of a person isn't in how they shine in comfort, but in how they endure in adversity. You've endured 23 years of being dismissed and overlooked, and you emerged honest and kind and genuine. That's exactly the kind of strength she values. Or she'll think I'm weak for not demanding better treatment. Then I'll explain that choosing silence to protect others is different from accepting defeat, and that recognizing your own worth after years of being told you have none takes more courage than most people possess in a lifetime. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Stop trying to predict disaster and trust that I know my own grandmother well enough to know she'll see what I see, someone extraordinary. The carriage rolled into London as afternoon light slanted through the streets. Clara had visited the city exactly 3 times in her life, always trailing behind her mother and sisters like an afterthought. Now she watched the grand buildings and bustling crowds with new eyes, realizing that this would be her world soon. Not as a visitor or a shadow, but as a duchess. The thought made her stomach churn with equal parts terror and exhilaration. Blackthorn House dominated an entire block in Mayfair, a massive stone edifice that spoke of centuries of power and wealth. Servants materialized the moment the carriage stopped, moving with the kind of choreographed precision that came from generations of service. Clara felt herself shrinking back into old patterns of invisibility, suddenly aware of her unfashionable dress and her plain face and her complete inadequacy for this world. Adrian's hand on her back steadied her. "Breathe," he murmured, "and remember, they work for you now, not the other way around." The butler, an elderly man with kind eyes and military bearing, bowed deeply. "Your Grace, Miss Whitmore, welcome home. The Dowager Duchess is waiting in the blue drawing room." "Of course she is," Adrian said dryly. "She probably knew we were coming before I did." They climbed a sweeping marble staircase and walked through corridors lined with portraits of Adrian's ancestors, stern-faced men and women who seemed to judge every person who passed beneath their painted gaze. Clara felt their eyes following her, weighing her, finding her wanting. The blue drawing room was aptly named, every surface draped in shades of sapphire and cobalt, from the silk wall coverings to the velvet furniture. And in the center of it all, like a queen on her throne, sat the Dowager Duchess of Blackthorn. She was smaller than Clara expected, barely 5 feet tall and bird-thin with age, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass, and her bearing suggested she could command armies with a lifted eyebrow. She wore black despite it being years since her husband's death, and diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists like declarations of war. "Grandmother?" Adrian bowed, then gently guided Clara forward. "May I present Miss Clara Whitmore? Clara, my grandmother, the Dowager Duchess." Clara managed what she hoped was an appropriate curtsy, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. The Dowager Duchess studied her in silence for what felt like an eternity. Those sharp eyes catalogued everything: the unfashionable dress, the simple hairstyle, the lack of jewelry, the obvious terror barely concealed behind attempted composure. Finally she spoke, her voice surprisingly strong. "So, you're the girl my grandson has decided to marry in 6 weeks, causing the greatest scandal London's seen in a decade." Clara swallowed hard. Yes, Your Grace. Look at me properly, child. I can't assess you if you're staring at the carpet. Clara forced herself to meet those piercing eyes, feeling as though her soul was being dissected and examined. The Dowager Duchess leaned back in her chair. You're not beautiful. No, Your Grace. There was no point in pretending otherwise. You're not charming or accomplished or fashionable. No, Your Grace. And yet my grandson, who could have his pick of the kingdom's finest women, has chosen you. So I ask you directly, what have you done to secure his affection? The question hung between them like a trap. Clara could feel Adrian tensing beside her, ready to intervene, but something in the Dowager Duchess's expression suggested this was a test, that the wrong answer would damn her, but the right one might earn grudging respect. Clara lifted her chin and met that sharp gaze directly. I told him the truth when everyone else was lying. I saw him as a person when everyone else saw a title, and when he was drowning in grief, I gave him a reason to hope instead of empty condolences. I didn't do any of it to secure his affection. I did it because he looked like he needed kindness, and I knew what it felt like to be invisible. Silence stretched across the elegant room. Adrian's hand found the small of Clara's back, steadying her. Then, impossibly, the Dowager Duchess smiled, a small, sharp expression that transformed her severe face. Good. You have spine. I was beginning to worry Adrian had gone soft after 12 years abroad. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. We have much to discuss if we're to make you presentable for society in 6 weeks. Clara sank into the offered chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. Grandmother, Adrian began. Be quiet, boy. I'm talking to your future wife. The Dowager Duchess turned her attention back to Clara. I'm going to be brutally honest with you, Miss Whitmore. Society is going to tear you apart. They're already inventing vicious stories about how you trapped my grandson. They're comparing you to every celebrated beauty in England and finding you lacking. They're waiting for you to make a mistake so they can point to it as proof that you were never worthy of the position. Clara's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to hold that penetrating gaze. I know. Do you? Do you truly understand what you're walking into? The Dowager Duchess leaned forward, her voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. Being a duchess isn't a fairy tale. It's a battlefield where the weapons are whispers and the casualties are reputations. You'll be scrutinized every moment of every day. Every word you speak, every dress you wear, every expression that crosses your face will be analyzed and criticized. And you'll be doing it all while carrying the weight of centuries of Blackthorn history on your shoulders. I understand, Clara said, though her voice shook slightly. No, you don't. But you will. The Dowager Duchess sat back. Which is why I'm going to train you. We have 6 weeks to transform you from an overlooked country girl into a woman who can hold her own against England's most vicious gossips. It won't be easy. It won't be pleasant. But if you're brave enough to try, I'll teach you how to survive the world you're about to enter. Clara glanced at Adrian, who looked as surprised as she felt. Why would you help me? Clara asked carefully. The Dowager Duchess's smile turned sharp. Because my grandson loves you. I can see it in the way he looks at you, like you're the only real thing in a world of painted facades. And because 30 years ago, I was a merchant's daughter who married a duke, and society tried to destroy me for it. I survived. I'll be damned if I let them destroy you. Something tight in Clara's chest loosened slightly. Thank you, Your Grace. Don't thank me yet. We start tomorrow morning at 7. I expect you to be punctual, properly dressed, and prepared to work harder than you've ever worked in your life. She turned to Adrian. You, go away. Your fiancé and I have much to discuss, and your hovering is distracting. Adrian looked like he wanted to argue, but his grandmother's expression brooked no disagreement. He squeezed Clara's shoulder once, a silent promise of support, then left the room. The moment the door closed, the Dowager Duchess's demeanor shifted slightly, becoming marginally less terrifying. Now then, tell me everything. And don't leave out the parts you think will shock me. I'm 83 years old. Nothing shocks me anymore. So Clara did. She told her about growing up invisible, about the ball where Adrian chose her, about the vicious gossip and her mother's horror. She told her about the stream and the stories and the 12-year gap that somehow didn't matter when they looked at each other. and she told her about the terror of believing she might actually deserve to be chosen. The Dowager Duchess listened without interruption, her sharp eyes never leaving Clara's face. When Clara finally finished, the older woman was quiet for a long moment. "You remind me of myself," she said finally, "though I had more fire and less patience. My husband's family tried to break me. They failed spectacularly." Her smile turned predatory. "We're going to make sure the same happens with you. By the time I'm finished, you'll walk into your wedding like a queen claiming her throne, and society will have no choice but to accept it." "I don't know if I can—" "Yes, you can. You've already proven it by accepting Adrian's proposal despite knowing the cost. Now you just need to learn how to weaponize your authenticity." The Dowager Duchess stood, suddenly all business. "We'll start with deportment, then move to conversation, then strategy. You'll need new dresses, many of them, and we'll need to carefully manage your first public appearance. A misstep there could be catastrophic." Clara's head spun. "Public appearance?" "The Ashford Ball. 3 weeks from now. The event of the season, and everyone who matters will be there." The Dowager Duchess's eyes gleamed. "It's the perfect opportunity to announce to society that the new Duchess of Blackthorn cannot be intimidated or dismissed. We'll make it a spectacle they'll never forget." "But Lady Ashford hates me. She'll never invite—" "She already has. An invitation arrived this morning." The Dowager Duchess handed Clara an embossed card. "She's inviting you because she wants to watch you fail publicly. She wants to prove to everyone that you're inadequate for the position. We're going to use her own trap against her." Clara stared at the invitation, feeling sick. "How?" "By being exactly who you are, honest, intelligent, and utterly uninterested in playing their shallow games. But we need to package it properly. Make them see your authenticity as strength instead of inadequacy." The Dowager Duchess's smile turned sharp. "Leave the strategy to me. Your job is to learn fast and trust me when I tell you what to do." Over the next 3 weeks, Clara learned what it meant to be trained by the most formidable woman in England. The Dowager Duchess was relentless. Every morning began at 7 with posture and deportment, hours of walking with books balanced on her head, practicing curtsies until her legs ached, learning how to enter a room with authority instead of apology. Then came conversation lessons, where she was drilled on every possible social situation and taught how to deflect insults with grace and deliver cutting remarks with a smile. "You're too apologetic," the Dowager Duchess snapped during one particularly grueling session. "Stop shrinking. A duchess doesn't apologize for existing. She expects others to accommodate her presence." Clara tried again, entering the drawing room as though she owned it instead of was visiting. The transformation felt foreign and uncomfortable, but slowly, painfully, she began to understand what the older woman was teaching her. Visibility required claiming space instead of disappearing into it. The dress fittings were torture of a different kind. The Dowager Duchess had commissioned an entire wardrobe from London's finest modiste, gowns in jewel tones that complemented Clara's dark coloring instead of washing her out. When Clara protested the expense, the older woman dismissed her concerns with a wave. "A duchess's appearance is part of her armor. These dresses aren't frivolous. They're weapons. Now stop fidgeting while Madame Dubois adjusts your hem." Adrian visited daily, though his grandmother often barred him from the actual training sessions. During their brief moments alone, he'd hold Clara while she cried from exhaustion and frustration, promising her that it would be worth it. "She's brutal because she wants you to survive," Adrian murmured one evening when Clara was particularly discouraged. "And because she sees what I see, that you have the strength to become extraordinary if you'll stop apologizing for it." "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm drowning." "Then let me be your anchor until you learn to swim." He kissed her forehead. 3 more weeks, love. Then you're mine forever, and no one can take that away." The word love made Clara's heart stutter, but Adrian said it so naturally, as though it were simply fact. The night before the Ashford Ball, the Dowager Duchess called Clara to her private sitting room. The older woman looked tired but satisfied, like a general who'd successfully trained raw recruits into soldiers. "Tomorrow, you face your first real test," she said without preamble. "Lady Ashford and her circle will do everything in their power to humiliate you. They'll ask cutting questions designed to expose your inadequacies. They'll compare you to other women and find you lacking. They'll watch for any sign of weakness and exploit it ruthlessly." Clara's stomach churned. Then perhaps I shouldn't attend. If you retreat now, they win. They prove that you were never strong enough for this position, and Adrian's judgment is forever questioned. The Dowager Duchess's eyes were hard. But if you walk in there tomorrow night with your head high and your spine straight, if you meet their attacks with grace and refuse to be diminished, you'll prove that you're exactly where you belong. I'm terrified. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. The older woman stood and crossed to a cabinet, retrieving a velvet box. Your wedding gift. I was planning to save it for the ceremony, but I think you need it now. Inside the box lay the most exquisite necklace Clara had ever seen, sapphires and diamonds arranged in an intricate pattern that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant shards. It belonged to the first Duchess of Blackthorn, the Dowager Duchess said quietly, a woman who married into the family when they were nothing but minor nobles scraping for influence. She transformed the entire duchy through intelligence and determination, and every duchess since has worn this on the night they claimed their power. She fastened it around Clara's neck. Tomorrow, you claim yours. Clara touched the stones with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of history settle against her collarbone. I don't know if I can do this. Then fake it until you believe it. The Dowager Duchess's smile was fierce. That's what I did. That's what every woman who's ever had to fight for her place has done. And tomorrow, when Lady Ashford tries to break you, you'll remember that you survived 23 years of being invisible and emerged genuine in a world of performers. That's a strength she'll never possess. Okay. The night of the Ashford ball arrived with the weight of execution day. Clara dressed in a gown the color of midnight, deep blue silk that shimmered with every movement, cut in the latest fashion but modest enough to avoid scandal. The sapphire necklace glittered at her throat. Her hair had been arranged in elaborate curls that her lady's maid, another gift from the Dowager Duchess, had spent 2 hours perfecting. Looking in the mirror, Clara barely recognized herself. She looked like a duchess. Now she just had to convince everyone else. Adrian arrived to collect her, and the expression on his face when he saw her made her breath catch. You're stunning, he said quietly, and there was something raw in his voice that suggested he meant it. I'm terrified, Clara admitted. Then we'll be terrified together. He offered his arm. Ready to show society exactly who they're dealing with? Clara took a deep breath and placed her hand on his arm. Let's go prove everyone wrong. The Ashford mansion blazed with light, music spilling from every window. Carriages lined the street, disgorging London's elite in a glittering parade of wealth and status. Clara felt her courage wavering as they climbed the steps, but Adrian's presence beside her steadied her. The butler announced them. His Grace, the Duke of Blackthorn, and Miss Clara Whitmore. Every conversation died. Every head turned. The entire ballroom fell into shocked silence as they entered. Clara had expected curiosity. She hadn't expected the wall of hostile judgment that slammed into her like a physical force. Women stared with barely concealed contempt. Men looked confused or pitying, and at the center of it all stood Lady Catherine Ashford, beautiful, accomplished, and wearing an expression of venomous satisfaction. Your Grace! Lady Ashford glided forward, her smile sharp as broken glass. And Miss Whitmore, how unexpected to see you here. I wasn't sure you'd feel comfortable among such elevated company. The insult was delivered with perfect politeness, the kind that left no opening for defense. Clara felt herself shrinking, old patterns of invisibility rushing back. But then she felt the weight of the sapphire necklace against her throat, remembered the Dowager Duchess's training, and forced herself to stand straighter. Lady Ashford, Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. Thank you for the invitation. Your home is lovely. How generous of you to say. Lady Ashford's smile didn't reach her eyes. Though I confess, I'm surprised to see you wearing such significant jewelry. That necklace has quite a history, doesn't it, Your Grace? The implication was clear. Who is this nobody to wear such an important piece? Adrian's expression turned to ice. Indeed, it's traditionally worn by women of exceptional strength and intelligence, those who've proven themselves worthy of the Blackthorn name. My grandmother felt it appropriate. A ripple of whispers spread through the watching crowd. Lady Ashford's smile flickered. How progressive of her. Lady Ashford turned her attention back to Clara. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, are you finding London society overwhelming? It must be quite different from your quiet country existence. I imagine you miss the simplicity of Hampshire, where expectations are so much lower. Each word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to expose Clara's inadequacy. Around them, people leaned in to hear how the country mouse would respond. Clara felt panic rising. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to agree, to make herself smaller so everyone else felt bigger. But then she caught sight of the Dowager Duchess watching from across the room, her sharp eyes commanding, "Stand your ground." "Actually," Clara said clearly, "I find London society refreshingly honest in its hostility. In the country, people at least pretend to be kind while they dismiss you. Here, the cruelty is right on the surface. It's almost refreshing." Shocked silence crashed down. Lady Ashford's face flushed. "I beg your pardon?" "I mean no offense, Lady Ashford." Clara met her gaze directly. "I simply appreciate clarity. You've made it abundantly clear that you find me inadequate for my position, that you believe the Duke has made a terrible mistake, that I should have stayed invisible where I belonged." She paused, letting the words settle. But the interesting thing about being invisible for 23 years is that it gives you time to observe, to see how society actually works beneath all the pretty performance. And what I've observed is that often the loudest critics are simply angry they didn't get what they wanted. The air in the ballroom turned electric. Lady Ashford looked ready to explode. Adrian's hand tightened on Clara's waist. Whether in warning or support, she couldn't tell. "Are you suggesting—" Lady Ashford began, her voice shaking with rage. "I'm not suggesting anything," Clara interrupted with perfect politeness. "I'm simply sharing an observation. Please don't let me keep you from your other guests. I'm sure you have many people to welcome." It was a dismissal, clear and unmistakable. And coming from someone society considered beneath Lady Ashford's notice, it was devastating. Lady Ashford's face went white, then red. She opened her mouth to respond, but the Dowager Duchess materialized at Clara's elbow with impeccable timing. "Lady Ashford, how kind of you to invite my grandson and his fiancée." The older woman's smile was pure steel. "Clara, dear, the Duchess of Somerset wishes to meet you. She's been quite impressed by your courage in facing down society's small-minded prejudices." The Dowager Duchess steered Clara away before Lady Ashford could recover, leaving the hostess standing frozen in impotent fury while whispers exploded around her. "Well done," the Dowager Duchess murmured as they crossed the ballroom. "You drew first blood. Now comes the harder part, maintaining that strength for the rest of the evening while they circle like sharks." "I think I'm going to be sick," Clara whispered. "You'll be magnificent instead." The Dowager Duchess guided her toward a group of older women who watched with expressions of interested speculation. "And remember, you're not fighting for acceptance. You're proving you don't need it." The next 2 hours were the longest of Clara's life. She was introduced to what felt like every important person in London, each encounter a test of her courage and composure. Some were openly hostile. Others watched with calculating interest, clearly reassessing their initial judgments. A few, mostly older women who remembered their own battles for position, offered quiet words of encouragement. But through it all, Clara felt the constant weight of judgment. Every word she spoke was analyzed, every gesture scrutinized. She was on display like an exotic animal at a menagerie, and the crowd had come to see if she would perform or break under pressure. Adrian never left her side, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. When Clara's courage faltered, his hand would find hers. When her smile grew strained, he'd lean close and whisper something that made her laugh despite everything. "You're doing brilliantly," he murmured during a brief moment alone. "Half the room is terrified of you, and the other half wants to be your friend. I think they're all just waiting for me to make a mistake so they can pounce." "Then don't make one." His smile was warm. "Or better yet, make mistakes that are so clearly intentional they can't tell if you're joking or serious. My grandmother excels at that." Clara was laughing when Lady Catherine found them again, this time with reinforcements. 3 other young women who looked like they'd stepped from a painting of aristocratic perfection. "Your Grace," Lady Catherine's voice dripped with false sweetness. "We were just discussing the duties of a duchess. Such important responsibilities, managing a household, hosting political dinners, representing the family at court. It requires years of training and preparation, doesn't it? The implication was brutal, which you clearly don't possess. Clara felt the trap closing. Every eye in the vicinity turned toward them, waiting to see how the inadequate country girl would respond. I imagine it does, Clara agreed calmly, though I found that intelligence and adaptability often matter more than years of practice following arbitrary rules. Some people are born knowing which fork to use. Others are born knowing how to think. One of Lady Catherine's companions gasped. Another looked ready to laugh. Are you suggesting that those of us raised in society lack intelligence? Lady Catherine's voice turned sharp. Not at all. I'm suggesting that perhaps there's more than one kind of intelligence worth valuing. Clara met her gaze steadily. Social grace is useful, but so is the ability to see through performance to truth, to recognize when people are being cruel under the guise of propriety, to understand that worth isn't measured by breeding or beauty, but by substance. How very philosophical, Lady Catherine sneered, though philosophy doesn't help much when you're hosting a dinner for foreign dignitaries and don't know the proper protocol. True. But neither does knowing protocol when you lack the intelligence to hold a meaningful conversation with those dignitaries. Clara smiled with perfect politeness. I imagine the best duchesses possess both. Fortunately, I have several weeks to learn protocol. Intelligence, however, can't be taught. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed, a genuine sound of surprised delight. Others joined in, the tension breaking like a snapped thread. Lady Catherine looked murderous, but before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A man burst into the ballroom, his clothes disheveled and his face flushed. Clara recognized him as Lord Marcus Ashford, Lady Catherine's younger brother. Catherine, he gasped, clearly having run some distance. You need to come immediately. It's about Miss Whitmore, about who she really is. Every conversation stopped. Clara felt ice flood her veins. Adrian stepped forward, his voice deadly quiet. What exactly are you suggesting? Lord Marcus looked between them, his expression a mixture of triumph and malicious glee. I've just come from Hampshire, from Whitmore Manor, and I've discovered something very interesting about Miss Clara Whitmore's past. Something that will interest everyone here very much indeed. Clara's mind raced through possibilities. What could he have found? What secret could she possibly possess? She'd lived her entire life in such obscurity that there was nothing to discover. Nothing scandalous, nothing hidden, nothing. And then, with horrifying clarity, she understood. Lord Marcus pulled a sheaf of papers from his coat. These, he announced to the riveted ballroom, are pages from a rather shocking collection of stories. Stories featuring characters with remarkable similarities to various members of society. Stories written in Miss Whitmore's own hand, recovered from the library at Whitmore Manor. Clara's blood turned to ice. Her stories, the ones she'd written during years of invisibility, bitter, angry stories where girls like her triumphed and beautiful, cruel women got exactly what they deserved. Stories she'd never intended anyone to read, stories that would destroy her if society knew about them. Shall I read some passages? Lord Marcus's smile was vicious. There's a particularly interesting one about a duke who falls in love with a plain girl who's been secretly manipulating him all along. Very creative. Almost prophetic, one might say. Adrian's hand tightened painfully on Clara's arm, but she barely felt it. The ballroom spun around her as she realized the full extent of the trap she'd walked into. They hadn't just wanted to humiliate her, they'd wanted to prove she was exactly what they'd always suspected, a scheming opportunist who'd calculated every move to trap a duke. And now, standing in front of all of London society, with her stories about to be read aloud as evidence of her manipulation, Clara faced the moment that would either destroy her completely or force her to become someone entirely new. Lord Marcus opened his mouth to begin reading, and Clara made the most terrifying choice of her life. Stop, she said clearly, her voice cutting through the anticipatory silence. Every eye fixed on her. Lord Marcus paused, looking disappointed that she'd interrupted his dramatic revelation. Clara stepped forward, away from Adrian's protective presence, and faced the ballroom full of people who wanted to watch her break. Those stories are mine, she said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. I wrote them. Every word. And yes, they're angry and bitter and probably shocking to people who've never spent a day being invisible. But they're also honest. They're what happens when a girl who's been dismissed her entire life dares to imagine a world where she matters. She could feel Adrian's shock behind her, hear the gasps rippling through the crowd. But she'd started now, and there was no retreating. "You want to know if I manipulated the Duke?" Clara's voice grew stronger. "I didn't, but I won't apologize for writing stories where girls like me get happy endings, where intelligence matters more than beauty, where being overlooked becomes a strength instead of a curse. If that makes me unsuitable to be Duchess, then I suppose you're right. I'm exactly the wrong woman for the position." She turned to Adrian, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I'm sorry. I should have told you, should have warned you that I wasn't what you thought, that I'm just a bitter, angry girl who wrote revenge fantasies in the margins of her forgotten life." The ballroom held its collective breath. And then Adrian did something that would be talked about in London drawing rooms for decades. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle or an uncomfortable deflection. A real, genuine laugh that echoed through the stunned silence. "You magnificent, impossible woman," he said, crossing to her and cupping her face in both hands. "Do you honestly think I care that you wrote angry stories? Do you think that makes you less worthy?" He turned to address the ballroom, his voice carrying absolute authority. "My fiancée spent 23 years being overlooked and dismissed, and instead of becoming cruel or empty, she poured her feelings into stories. She created worlds where overlooked girls mattered, where substance triumphed over surface. And you think that makes her unsuitable to be my Duchess?" He looked back at Clara, his gray eyes blazing with something that looked dangerously like pride. "That makes her the perfect Duchess, because she understands what it feels like to be powerless. She knows how to survive adversity, and she has the courage to stand in front of everyone who's tried to destroy her and refuse to apologize for existing." Adrian turned back to the stunned crowd. "So yes, she wrote stories. She wrote angry, honest stories. And I'm about to spend the rest of my life making sure she never has to retreat to fantasies again because her reality is finally good enough." He pulled Clara against him and kissed her in front of the entire ballroom. A deliberate, unmistakable claiming that left no room for doubt or speculation. When they finally broke apart, the room erupted into chaos. Some people applauded, others looked scandalized. Lord Marcus stood frozen, his dramatic revelation having backfired spectacularly. The Dowager Duchess's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Well, I believe that settles any questions about whether Miss Whitmore possesses the spine required for her position. Now, shall we continue the ball, or would you all prefer to stand around gaping like fish?" Slowly, conversations resumed. The orchestra started playing again, and Clara stood in Adrian's arms, shaking with the aftershocks of having just burned down every bridge, and discovered she could survive the fall. "That was insane," she whispered against his chest. "That was perfect," Adrian corrected. "Now the entire world knows exactly who you are, and that I chose you anyway. No more speculation, no more doubts. They're going to hate me more than ever. Some will. Others will respect you for refusing to apologize." Adrian tilted her chin up. "And the ones who matter will see what I see. A woman who survived being dismissed for 23 years and emerged with her integrity intact. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary strength." Clara wanted to believe him. But as she looked around the ballroom at the mixture of shocked faces and malicious whispers, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made everything infinitely worse. The invisible daughter had just become the most talked about scandal in London. And in 3 weeks, she would have to walk down the aisle and become a duchess while the entire world watched, waiting for her to fail. The carriage ride back to Blackthorn House passed in stunned silence. Clara sat rigid against the velvet cushions, her mind replaying the evening's catastrophe in excruciating detail. She'd just confessed to writing bitter revenge fantasies in front of London's entire elite. She'd challenged Lady Catherine publicly. She'd been kissed by a duke in a ballroom full of witnesses while scandal exploded around them. The invisible daughter had become impossible to ignore. Adrian sat across from her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. The Dowager Duchess had insisted on traveling separately, claiming she needed to begin damage control immediately. Clara suspected the older woman simply wanted to give them privacy to either reconcile or combust. "Say something," Clara finally whispered, unable to bear the silence any longer. Adrian leaned forward, his gray eyes catching the lamplight from passing street corners. What would you like me to say? That I've ruined everything. That you're reconsidering. That you didn't know you were marrying someone who wrote angry stories about society for years. Clara's voice cracked. That maybe Lord Marcus was right to expose me. Lord Marcus is a vindictive fool who thought he could embarrass you into retreating. Adrian's voice carried an edge of steel. Instead, you stood in front of everyone who wanted to watch you break and refused to apologize for surviving. Do you have any idea how extraordinary that was? It was insane. It was honest. Adrian moved to sit beside her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. Clara, I don't care that you wrote stories. I care that you were so alone you had to escape into fiction to feel valued. And I care that instead of letting them use your creativity as a weapon, you claimed it as strength. Clara's eyes burned. They think I'm a schemer, that I calculated everything to trap you. Let them think it. Anyone with functioning intelligence knows you can't fake the kind of authenticity you showed tonight. He brushed a tear from her cheek. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Clara's stomach dropped. What? Do you want to marry me? Not because society expects it now, not because you're afraid of the scandal if you refuse, but because you actually want to spend your life with me? His gray eyes held hers with devastating intensity. Because if you're having doubts, if this is all too much, I'll find a way to release you from the engagement. I'll take the blame. I'll tell everyone I was the one who made a mistake, but I need to know if you're choosing this or just enduring it. The question hung between them, raw and necessary. Clara had been so focused on surviving society's attacks that she hadn't stopped to examine what she actually wanted beneath the terror. She thought about the boy by the stream who'd needed kindness. The man who'd walked past every celebrated beauty to dance with her. The Duke who'd spent 3 weeks courting her despite knowing it would cause scandal. The person who looked at her anger and called it strength instead of flaw. I'm terrified, Clara said quietly. I'm terrified of failing you, of becoming Duchess and proving everyone right that I was never adequate for the position. Of waking up one morning and seeing regret in your eyes when you realize what you've tied yourself to. That's not what I asked. I know. Clara took a shaking breath. But underneath the terror, yes, I want to marry you. I want to believe that maybe I deserve to be chosen, that maybe invisible girls can have happy endings too. She met his gaze. I just don't know if I'm brave enough to survive what comes after. Adrian pulled her against him, his arms solid and steady around her trembling body. Then I'll be brave for both of us. Just like I promised. Clara pressed her face into his shoulder and finally let herself cry. Great shaking sobs that released weeks of accumulated fear and pressure. Adrian held her through it all, one hand stroking her hair while he murmured reassurances she couldn't quite hear over her own gasping breaths. When she finally quieted, exhausted and empty, Adrian tilted her chin up. We have 3 weeks until the wedding. 3 weeks for society to exhaust themselves with speculation, and 3 weeks for you to decide if you're ready to walk down that aisle. But Clara, no matter what you choose, know that I see you, all of you, the anger and the fear and the strength you don't realize you possess, and I love every part of it. The word love, said with such casual certainty, made Clara's breath catch. You can't possibly. I can. I do. Adrian kissed her forehead. And I'll spend however long it takes convincing you that you're worthy of it. Yeah. The next morning, Clara woke to find London's gossip columns had exploded with competing narratives about the previous night's drama. Some painted her as a calculating seductress who'd manipulated the Duke with carefully crafted performances. Others described her as a romantic heroine too honest for society's artificial constraints. A few, written by women who'd clearly experienced their own battles for position, called her brave for refusing to apologize. But the most unexpected response came via a hand-delivered letter from the Duchess of Somerset, one of the most influential women in England. Clara broke the seal with shaking hands and read, Miss Whitmore, I was present last night when Lord Marcus attempted to expose your private writings. I watched you choose honesty over self-protection, and I found myself remembering my own youth when I was told that intellectual women made unsuitable wives. Your courage reminded me why I fought so hard to prove them wrong. If you would do me the honor, I would like to call on you this afternoon. I believe we have much to discuss. Duchess of Somerset. Clara stared at the letter, unable to process what she was reading. The Duchess of Somerset wanted to visit her. The woman whose salon was legendary for attracting England's brightest minds wanted to meet the scandalous country girl who'd written angry stories. Good news? The Dowager Duchess appeared in the doorway, already dressed despite the early hour. She looked tired but satisfied, the expression of someone who'd spent the night maneuvering chess pieces across multiple boards. The Duchess of Somerset wants to call on me. Clara handed over the letter, still dazed. Why would she? Because she recognizes an ally when she sees one. The Dowager Duchess scanned the letter and smiled sharply. Excellent. This is exactly what we need. If Somerset publicly supports you, half of London's intellectual set will follow. The shallow gossips will still despise you, but the people who actually matter will see you as one of them. But you're a woman who writes, who thinks, who refuses to perform empty charm. The Dowager Duchess set down the letter. That makes you dangerous to people who've built their entire identity on surface beauty and social manipulation. But it makes you invaluable to those who value substance. Clara sank into a chair, her mind racing. I don't understand what's happening. Last night I thought I'd destroyed everything. This morning the Duchess of Somerset wants to meet me. How can both things be true? Because society isn't a monolith, child. It's a battlefield with competing factions, and you've just been claimed by the side that values intelligence. The Dowager Duchess poured tea with steady hands. The shallow socialites will hate you, the ambitious mothers will resent you, but the women who've fought their own battles for recognition will see themselves in you, and those women wield more power than you realize. The Duchess of Somerset arrived that afternoon precisely at 3 o'clock, sweeping into the Blackthorn drawing room like a force of nature. She was younger than Clara expected, perhaps 50, with sharp eyes and a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Miss Whitmore. The Duchess extended her hand. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I hope I'm not intruding. Your Grace. Clara managed a curtsy that didn't completely embarrass her. You honor me with your visit. On the contrary, you've given me the most interesting entertainment London's seen in years. The Duchess settled into a chair with easy grace. I haven't seen Lady Catherine so thoroughly outmaneuvered since her failed attempt to steal Lord Pemberton from his wife. It was magnificent. Clara felt her face heat. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to survive. You were doing exactly what needed to be done, standing your ground instead of apologizing for existing. The Duchess accepted tea from a servant. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, do you still write? Or did last night's exposure frighten you away from your stories? The question was casually delivered, but Clara sensed it mattered enormously. She thought about lying, claiming she'd given up such childish pursuits. But Adrian's words from the carriage echoed in her mind. You stood in front of everyone who wanted to watch you break and refused to apologize for surviving. I write, Clara said quietly. I've been writing since I learned to form letters. It's the only thing that kept me sane during years of being overlooked. Good. The Duchess's smile was genuine. Because I host a salon every Thursday evening where London's writers, artists, and thinkers gather to discuss ideas. We've been in desperate need of fresh perspectives. If you're willing, I'd like to invite you to join us. Clara's heart hammered. Your Grace, I'm just a girl who scribbles stories in the margins. I'm not a real writer, not like the people you must know. Define real writer. The Duchess leaned forward. Is it someone who's published? Because I know plenty of published fools. Is it someone who's studied formally? Because some of our finest storytellers never set foot in a university. Or is it simply someone who has something true to say and the courage to say it? Clara swallowed hard. I don't know if my stories are true. They're mostly just angry fantasies. Revenge against a world that dismissed me. Those are often the truest stories of all. The Duchess's expression turned serious. Miss Whitmore, Clara, if I may, you've stumbled into something important without realizing it. You've become a symbol, not just of an overlooked girl who captured a duke's attention, but of every woman who's been told her intelligence doesn't matter as much as her appearance. Every girl who's been dismissed for being too thoughtful or too honest or too real. I didn't ask to be a symbol. No one ever does. But now that you are, you have a choice. You can retreat and apologize and try to become what society expects. Or you can claim your voice and show other women that it's possible to survive being different. The Duchess paused. I'm not saying it will be easy. The shallow faction will continue attacking you. But if you stand firm, you'll inspire others to do the same. And that's how change happens, one brave woman at a time. Clara thought about Eleanor trapped in a marriage of duty, about Sophie learning to charm instead of think because charm was what society valued, about all the girls growing up believing they had to perform and sparkle and disappear into whatever role was assigned to them. I'll come to your salon, Clara heard herself say. I can't promise I'll have anything interesting to contribute, but I'll come. The Duchess's smile turned fierce. You'll have plenty to contribute, trust me, Shout. The Thursday salon was unlike anything Clara had experienced. Instead of the rigid social hierarchies and artificial conversations that dominated most gatherings, Somerset House buzzed with genuine intellectual exchange. Writers debated narrative structure. Painters argued about light and shadow. Philosophers explored questions that had no easy answers. And in the center of it all, Clara found herself actually participating. When someone asked her opinion on character motivation in popular novels, she answered honestly, explaining how most heroines seem to exist only to be rescued, never to rescue themselves. When another guest challenged her, she defended her position with examples from the stories she'd read. That's precisely the problem with current literature, declared a young man who'd been introduced as a playwright. Female characters are decorative. They exist to inspire male heroes, not to be heroes themselves. Because publishers know that's what sells, countered an older woman with ink-stained fingers. Society doesn't want complex women. They want angels or villains, nothing in between. Then perhaps society needs to be challenged, Clara said quietly, surprising herself. Perhaps we need stories about real women, complicated ones, angry ones who don't apologize for having thoughts. Silence fell across the small group surrounding her. Then the playwright grinned. The future Duchess of Blackthorn has radical ideas. I approve. The evening continued in that vein, challenging discussions that made Clara think harder than she had in years. No one treated her as the scandalous fiancée. No one seemed to care that she'd been exposed for writing angry stories. They cared about her ideas. When the salon ended, the Duchess of Somerset pulled Clara aside. You're a natural. The conversation completely changed when you arrived, became more honest, more willing to challenge conventions. She paused. I have a proposition. My publisher is looking for fresh voices. If you have any complete stories, I'd be happy to pass them along. No promises, but he values my recommendations. Clara's breath caught. Your Grace, I couldn't possibly. Why not? Because you're about to become a duchess? Because duchesses aren't supposed to write? The older woman's eyes gleamed. Clara, you're about to have a platform that most writers would kill for. You could use it to host elegant dinners and look decorative, or you could use it to actually change things. The choice is yours. That night, Clara lay awake in her room at Blackthorn House, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile all the competing versions of herself. The invisible daughter, the scandalous fiancée, the woman who'd found her voice at a salon full of intellectuals, the future duchess whose society expected to fail. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Clara? Are you awake? Adrian's voice. Clara grabbed a robe and opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, looking unusually uncertain. I couldn't sleep, he admitted. Kept thinking about you at that salon tonight. The way you lit up when you were talking about stories and characters. I've never seen you look so alive. Clara pulled him into her room, propriety be damned. It was extraordinary. They actually listened to me, like my thoughts mattered. Because they do matter. Adrian sat on the edge of her bed, and Clara curled beside him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. I told you, you have substance. Tonight other people finally saw it too. The Duchess of Somerset thinks I should submit my stories for publication. Clara said it quickly, before fear could stop her. She has a publisher who might be interested. I know it sounds insane. It sounds perfect. Adrian turned to face her fully. Clara, I don't want you to become Duchess and disappear into the role. I want you to become Duchess and transform what the role means. Write your stories. Attend intellectual salons. Show society that women can be both intelligent and powerful. Society will hate me for it. Some will. Others will be inspired by it. He cupped her face gently. And I'll be proud of you for doing it. Clara kissed him then, not the desperate kiss of panic from the ball, but something slower and deeper. A promise that maybe she was brave enough to believe she deserved this. All of it. When they finally broke apart, Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. 2 weeks until the wedding. Are you ready? No, Clara admitted, but I'm going to do it anyway. The next days passed in a blur of preparation and cautious optimism. Clara attended 2 more Somerset salons and found herself gradually relaxing into genuine conversation. She revised 3 of her stories and, with shaking hands, submitted them to the publisher the Duchess had recommended. She endured final dress fittings and learned the intricate choreography of the wedding ceremony. And slowly, gradually, she noticed that society's response to her was shifting. The shallow socialites still despised her. Lady Catherine had made it her personal mission to spread vicious rumors, but other women began approaching Clara with quiet words of support. A young baroness confessed she'd always loved reading, but was told it made her unattractive. An older countess admitted she'd once written poetry, but destroyed it all when her husband laughed at her efforts. You're giving them permission to be more than decorative, the Dowager Duchess observed during one of their now daily conversations. That's why the shallow ones are terrified. You're proving that a woman can be chosen for her mind instead of her face. It threatens their entire worldview. I'm not trying to threaten anyone, I'm just trying to survive. Survival is revolutionary when the system expects you to fail. The older woman smiled. You're doing better than I dared hope. The intellectual faction has claimed you. The Duke clearly adores you, and you're starting to believe you might actually deserve it all. That's the most important transformation. But the real turning point came 1 week before the wedding, when Clara received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor arrived at Blackthorn House looking exhausted and determined. Clara hadn't seen her sister since the day of the engagement announcement, though they'd exchanged brief letters. Now Eleanor stood in the drawing room, twisting her gloves in her hands and looking like she might bolt at any moment. I need to tell you something, Eleanor said without preamble, and I need you to listen before you judge me. Clara gestured to a chair. Of course. Eleanor sat but didn't relax. I've been lying to you, to everyone, about Lord Hampton, about being happy. She took a shaking breath. I'm miserable, Clara. I thought I could endure it, thought that duty and security would be enough. But watching you fight for genuine happiness made me realize I've been slowly dying in a marriage that makes me feel invisible. Clara's heart clenched. Eleanor, let me finish. Eleanor's voice strengthened. You were right at breakfast that morning, about wondering what it would be like to be chosen for something other than your face. You asked, and I dismissed it because facing that question meant admitting I'd made a terrible mistake. But you didn't let fear stop you. You kept choosing courage even when everyone told you that you weren't enough. And I need to do the same. What are you saying? Eleanor met her eyes directly. I'm leaving Lord Hampton, not because of another man or because of scandal, but because I deserve better than a life where I'm just decorative. I deserve to be seen. Tears spilled down her perfect face. Watching you become Duchess, watching you refuse to apologize for being different, gave me permission to want more. So I'm taking it. Mother will be horrified. Society will condemn me. But you taught me that surviving other people's judgment is possible if you believe in your own worth. Clara pulled her sister into a fierce embrace. You're sure? Terrified and sure at the same time, Eleanor whispered. Just like you. Then do it. Clara pulled back to meet Eleanor's eyes. And when society tries to tear you down, you come here. To Blackthorn House, to me, because invisible daughters need to protect each other. Eleanor's laugh was watery but genuine. The middle daughter became the strong one. Who would have predicted that? Anyone who actually looked at me instead of past me, Claire replied. That afternoon, Eleanor formally informed Lord Hampton of her decision. The scandal erupted with predictable fury. Mrs. Whitmore nearly collapsed from the shock, and society gossips had a field day speculating about what could drive a woman away from such an advantageous match. But Clara stood beside her sister through it all, offering Blackthorn House as sanctuary and Adrian's influence as protection. "You're creating a refuge for misfit women," Adrian observed with amusement as Eleanor settled into a guest room. "First yourself, now your sister. Should I expect more arrivals?" "Only if they need help escaping marriages or situations that make them invisible," Clara replied. "Is that a problem?" "It's perfect." Adrian pulled her close. "My unconventional duchess building her own court of extraordinary women who refuse to apologize for existing. Society won't know what hit them." 3 days before the wedding, the publisher's letter arrived. Clara opened it with shaking hands, certain it would be a polite rejection. Instead, she read, "Miss Whitmore, your stories are unlike anything currently being published, raw, honest, and refreshingly unconventional. I would like to publish a collection of 3 under a pseudonym if you prefer privacy, or under your own name if you wish to claim them. The choice is yours. I believe these stories will resonate with many women who felt overlooked or dismissed. Please advise how you'd like to proceed. Mr. Edmund Fraser, Fraser Publishing." Clara read it 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. Her stories, the angry fantasies she'd written in the margins of Invisibility, were going to be published. People would read them. Women like her would see themselves reflected and know they weren't alone. "Adrian!" She found him in his study, surrounded by estate paperwork. "Adrian, look, they want to publish my stories." He read the letter, then swept her into his arms with a whoop of celebration. "I knew it. I knew people would see what I saw, that your honesty is exactly what the world needs." "Should I use a pseudonym? The Dowager Duchess says a duchess publishing stories might cause—" "Use your name." Adrian's voice was firm. "Use your name and claim your work, and show society that duchesses can be more than decorative. That's the whole point, isn't it? Proving that women can be chosen for substance instead of surface." Clara thought about the girl she'd been, invisible and silent, writing stories she never thought anyone would read. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming, visible and vocal, refusing to apologize for having a voice. "Clara Whitmore," she said firmly. "I'll publish under my own name. Let them talk." The night before the wedding, the Dowager Duchess summoned Clara to her private sitting room. The older woman looked tired but satisfied, and she held a small leather journal in her hands. "I want to give you something," she said without preamble. "My journal from the year I married into this family. The year society tried to destroy me for being a merchant's daughter who dared marry a duke." Clara accepted the journal reverently. "Your Grace, I couldn't— Read it tonight. See how I survived. See that the woman society tried to break became the most respected matriarch in England." The Dowager Duchess smiled. "You remind me so much of myself, that same mixture of fear and determination, that same refusal to apologize even when terrified. You're going to be an extraordinary duchess, Clara, not because you're perfect, but because you're real." "What if I fail?" "Then you'll get up and try again." The older woman's eyes were fierce. "But you won't fail. You've already done the hardest part, believing you deserve to be chosen. Everything else is just details." That night, Clara read the journal cover to cover. The Dowager Duchess's words from 30 years ago could have been her own. The same fears, the same determination, the same gradual transformation from terrified girl to powerful woman. And scrawled on the final page in handwriting that had grown shaky with age was a recent addition. "To the next extraordinary woman who refuses to apologize. You are enough, exactly as you are. Never let them convince you otherwise." Your proud predecessor, Clara, closed the journal and looked out the window at Blackthorn Hall's gardens, illuminated by moonlight. Tomorrow she would walk down the aisle and become duchess. Tomorrow society would watch to see if she'd fail. Tomorrow she'd either vindicate everyone who believed in her or prove right everyone who said she was inadequate. But tonight she was just Clara Whitmore, a girl who'd spent 23 years being invisible and had finally learned to claim space in the world. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Adrian entered despite the hour, tradition be damned. "I know I'm not supposed to see you before the wedding," he said, crossing to where she stood by the window. But I needed to tell you something. What? He took both her hands in his. That no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter how society reacts or what challenges we face, I will never regret choosing you. You're the bravest person I know, and I'm honored that you're brave enough to choose me back. Clara's eyes burned with tears. I'm still terrified. Good. It means you understand what we're doing, changing the fundamental rules of what a duchess can be. That should be terrifying. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. But we'll be terrified together, and we'll prove that real love, the kind built on honesty and respect instead of performance, is stronger than any scandal. Promise me something, Clara whispered. Anything. Promise that when I stumble, because I will stumble, you won't regret this. Won't wish you'd chosen someone better suited for the role. Adrian cupped her face in both hands, his gray eyes intense in the moonlight. I promise that when you stumble, I'll be there to steady you. And I promise that I'll never want anyone else, because no one else has ever been real with me the way you are. You're not better suited or worse suited. You're perfectly Clara, and that's exactly who I want beside me. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promises they'd spend a lifetime keeping. When he finally left, Clara returned to the window and looked out at the gardens that would soon be hers to tend. Tomorrow she would walk down an aisle while society held its breath. Tomorrow she would become the Duchess of Blackthorn, despite every voice that said she wasn't enough. Tomorrow, the invisible daughter would claim her place in the world and prove that being overlooked was never about worth. It was only ever about people who refused to look. But tonight, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved every bit of the happiness she'd been brave enough to claim. The forgotten daughter had found her voice, and tomorrow, the entire world would hear it. Dawn broke over Blackthorn Hall with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything feel significant. Clara stood at her window watching the sun paint the gardens gold, her wedding dress hanging like a ghost behind her. In 6 hours, she would walk down the aisle. In 6 hours, society would watch to see if the invisible daughter had the courage to claim her place. A knock sounded, and Sophie burst in without waiting for permission, her face flushed with excitement and something that looked like worry. They're gathering already, Sophie announced breathlessly. People from London, from Hampshire, even from as far as Scotland. The chapel is going to be packed. Mother says it's the event of the decade. Everyone wants to see if you'll actually go through with it or if you'll run. Clara's stomach twisted. That's comforting. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to prepare you. Sophie crossed to the window and stood beside her sister. Half of them are hoping you'll succeed because you're giving other overlooked girls hope. The other half are waiting for you to fail so they can prove that girls like us should stay invisible. Either way, every eye in England will be watching. No pressure then. Sophie grinned, but her eyes were serious. Clara, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said weeks ago. She took a breath. I used to think you were lucky. That being overlooked meant you were free while Eleanor and I were trapped performing for an audience that never stopped judging. But watching you these past months, watching you fight for recognition while we just accepted our roles, I realized you were the brave one all along. You survived being dismissed for 23 years and still believed you deserved more. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. Clara's throat tightened. I didn't feel strong. I felt invisible. Maybe that's the same thing. Maybe surviving invisibility and emerging still hoping takes more courage than any of us realized. Sophie squeezed her hand. Now get dressed. Your future is waiting, and you're going to claim it so beautifully that everyone who ever overlooked you will spend the rest of their lives regretting it. The wedding dress was a masterpiece. Ivory silk that shimmered with every movement, embroidered with delicate flowers that caught the light. The Dowager Duchess's sapphire necklace rested against Clara's collarbone, a weight of history and promise. Her hair had been arranged in elaborate curls threaded with pearls, and for the first time in her life, Clara looked in the mirror and saw someone who might actually deserve to be chosen. You look like a queen, Eleanor breathed from the doorway. She'd been staying at Blackthorn Hall since leaving Lord Hampton, and the past week had transformed her. The brittle perfection was gone, replaced by something softer but infinitely stronger. Or maybe a warrior going into battle. Both, I think. Clara turned from the mirror, feeling the dress swirl around her. I'm terrified, Eleanor. Good. It means you know what you're doing matters. Eleanor crossed the room and took Clara's hands. I spent my entire life being beautiful and perfect and exactly what society wanted, and I was miserable. You spent your life being overlooked and dismissed, and you emerged real. If I could go back, I'd trade every compliment on my face for one moment of the courage you've shown every single day. You're showing that courage now, leaving Hampton, choosing yourself, because you taught me it was possible. Eleanor's smile was watery. You're changing things, Clara. Not just for yourself, but for every girl who's watching you prove that we don't have to perform to matter. Don't lose your nerve now. The Dowager Duchess appeared in the doorway, resplendent in deep purple silk and dripping with diamonds. Her sharp eyes swept over Clara with an expression that might have been pride. "Well," she said crisply, "you clean up rather nicely. Though I suppose we should expect nothing less after 3 weeks of intensive training." She crossed to Clara and adjusted the sapphire necklace with gentle hands. "My grandmother gave this to me on my wedding day. She told me it was armor disguised as jewelry, a reminder that duchesses are warriors whether society acknowledges it or not. Now I'm passing that wisdom to you." "What if I'm not strong enough?" Clara whispered. "You survived 23 years of being told you didn't matter and still believed you deserved love. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." The Dowager Duchess stepped back, her expression fierce. "Now listen carefully. There are approximately 400 people in that chapel. Half of them are hoping you'll succeed. A quarter want you to fail. And the rest are simply curious about the scandalous match everyone's been discussing. Your job is to walk down that aisle like you own it, because after today you will. This estate, this title, this entire world becomes yours to reshape. Don't you dare shrink now." A commotion from below drew them to the window. Carriages lined the drive as far as they could see, disgorging society's elite in their finest clothes. Clara recognized faces from the Ashford Ball, from Somerset salons, from the vicious gossip columns. All of them coming to witness whether the invisible daughter had the spine to become duchess. "It's time," the Dowager Duchess said. "Are you ready?" Clara took one last look in the mirror, at the girl who'd spent a lifetime in shadows, now dressed like she belonged in the light. "As ready as I'll ever be." The walk to the chapel felt both endless and far too short. Clara descended Blackthorn Hall's grand staircase on her father's arm, feeling the weight of centuries of history pressing down. Her father, who'd barely spoken to her in weeks, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Your mother wanted me to talk you out of this," he said quietly. "She thinks you're making a terrible mistake, that you'll embarrass the family." Clara's heart sank. Even now, even on her wedding day, her mother couldn't support her. "But I told her she was wrong," her father continued, surprising Clara into looking at him directly. "I told her that I'd spent 23 years overlooking you, assuming you'd just exist quietly on the margins. And then you went and proved that quiet doesn't mean weak, that invisible doesn't mean worthless." His voice roughened. "I'm sorry, Clara. For all the years I didn't see you, I'm seeing you now." Tears burned Clara's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, Father." They reached the chapel entrance, and Clara could hear the murmur of hundreds of voices inside. Her father squeezed her arm once. Then the doors opened, and every sound died as society turned to witness the invisible daughter's transformation. The chapel was magnificent, ancient stone soaring toward vaulted ceilings, stained glass casting rainbow patterns across polished floors, flowers overflowing from every surface. But Clara barely saw any of it. Her entire focus locked on the man standing at the altar, his gray eyes finding hers across the distance with an intensity that made her breath catch. Adrian looked devastating in his formal clothes, every inch the powerful Duke society expected. But when he saw Clara, his carefully controlled expression cracked into something raw and honest. Love, Clara realized. Not the performative kind that society valued, but the real kind that saw every flaw and chose anyway. The organ began and Clara started walking. Every step down that aisle felt significant, a deliberate choice to claim space she'd been told she didn't deserve. She could feel society's eyes cataloging every detail, searching for evidence of inadequacy. She could see Lady Catherine's expression of bitter resentment, could see Mrs. Whitmore's tight-lipped disapproval, could see dozens of faces that had looked through her for years now forced to acknowledge her existence. But she also saw the Dowager Duchess's fierce pride, saw Eleanor and Sophie beaming from the front row, saw the Duchess of Somerset and the other women from the salons watching with expressions of solidarity, saw the people who'd chosen to believe she mattered, and she saw Adrian, waiting for her with absolute certainty in his eyes, as though there'd never been any doubt that she'd walk this aisle and claim her place beside him. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient words and sacred promises. Clara's voice shook when she spoke her vows, but she spoke them clearly. Adrian's voice was steady and sure, each word a declaration that this was real, permanent, forever. When the vicar pronounced them married, Adrian kissed her with such tender intensity that Clara forgot about the watching crowd entirely. They were married. The invisible daughter had become a duchess, and the real battle was about to begin. The wedding breakfast at Blackthorn Hall was an elaborate affair, hundreds of guests filling the grand ballroom, champagne flowing like water, musicians playing while society's elite celebrated or seethed depending on their faction. Clara stood beside Adrian, accepting congratulations from an endless stream of people who'd never bothered to learn her name before. "Your Grace," Lady Catherine appeared with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What a memorable ceremony. I'm sure you'll find being Duchess quite different from your quiet country existence." The barb was delivered with perfect politeness, but the malice underneath was unmistakable. Clara felt herself starting to shrink into old patterns of invisibility, apologizing, retreating, making herself smaller. Then she felt Adrian's hand on her back, steadying her, felt the weight of the sapphire necklace against her throat, reminding her she was a warrior. Felt 23 years of being dismissed crystallize into something hard and unbreakable. "I'm sure I will," Clara replied, her voice calm. "Though I've found that adapting to new situations is quite manageable when you possess intelligence instead of just beauty. Intelligence is so much more versatile." Lady Catherine's face flushed. "Do excuse us," Clara continued pleasantly. "The Duchess of Somerset wished to speak with me about literature. Real conversations are so much more engaging than empty social pleasantries, don't you think?" She walked away before Lady Catherine could respond, Adrian's quiet laugh rumbling beside her. "You're magnificent when you're dangerous," he murmured. "I'm terrified," Clara admitted, "but I'm tired of apologizing for existing." "Then stop apologizing and start owning it." Adrian guided her toward where the Duchess of Somerset stood with a group of the intellectual set. "Show them what a duchess can be when she's real instead of decorative." The conversation with Somerset's circle flowed easily, discussions of literature and philosophy that made Clara feel alive instead of performed. She found herself relaxing into genuine engagement, forgetting to monitor every word for potential scandal. Other guests drifted over, drawn by the authentic energy of real conversation instead of artificial charm. "You're creating something new," Somerset observed quietly when the others were distracted. "A salon culture within the aristocracy, valuing substance over surface. Half the women here are watching you with envy, wishing they had permission to be real too. And the other half are terrified you'll succeed and prove their entire worldview wrong." Somerset's smile was sharp. "Let them be terrified. Fear is how change begins." As the afternoon wore into evening, Clara noticed a shift in the atmosphere. People who'd been watching with skeptical judgment began approaching with tentative curiosity. A young baroness confessed she'd always wanted to write but was afraid. An older countess admitted she'd given up her artistic pursuits when she married because her husband considered them frivolous. A merchant's daughter about to marry into nobility whispered that Clara gave her hope she could survive the transition. "You're collecting them," Adrian murmured, watching the gathering crowd of women. "Every overlooked girl, every dismissed intellect, every woman who's tired of performing. They're looking to you as proof that authenticity can survive in this world. That's a lot of responsibility." "That's the power of being first." Adrian pressed a kiss to her temple. "You're not just a duchess. You're the duchess who proved it could be done differently. That matters." But the real turning point came after dinner, when the Dowager Duchess stood and called for attention. The room fell silent as the formidable matriarch surveyed her guests with the expression of a general about to deliver battle orders. "For those who don't know me well," she began, her voice carrying to every corner, "I am not given to sentimentality. I believe in strength, intelligence, and the courage to face truth without flinching. 30 years ago, I married into this family as a merchant's daughter, an unsuitable match by society's standards. Many predicted I would fail spectacularly. Uncomfortable silence rippled through the crowd. This was not the expected celebratory toast. I spent years proving myself, learning aristocratic ways, performing the role society demanded while dying inside from the effort of being someone I wasn't. The Dowager Duchess's eyes swept across the room. And then one day, I stopped performing. I started being myself, blunt, intelligent, occasionally inappropriate. And do you know what happened? The people who mattered respected me more. The people who didn't matter revealed themselves as fools. And the entire system adjusted because one woman refused to apologize for her authenticity. She turned to Clara, her sharp eyes softening just slightly. Today, my grandson married a woman society dismissed as invisible, a woman many of you overlooked because she didn't sparkle on command or perform the expected feminine charm. But Adrian saw what I see, that Clara possesses the rarest quality in our artificial world. She is genuine, and that genuine quality is going to transform this dukedom, and if we're lucky, challenge the entire shallow system that almost destroyed both of us. The Dowager Duchess raised her glass. To the new Duchess of Blackthorn, may she have the courage to remain exactly as honest as she is right now. May she continue writing stories that make comfortable people uncomfortable. And may she prove to every overlooked girl watching that being real is stronger than being decorative. To Clara. To Clara! The room echoed, some voices enthusiastic, others grudging, all of them acknowledging that something fundamental had just shifted. Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't care. The most formidable woman in England had just publicly claimed her as worthy, had just told 400 of society's elite that the invisible daughter deserved exactly what she'd claimed. Adrian pulled her close, murmuring against her hair. "You're not invisible anymore, love. You're unforgettable." The evening continued with dancing and celebration, but Clara found herself pulled aside repeatedly by women wanting to share their own stories. The young wife trapped in a loveless marriage, the widow who'd given up her painting to please her late husband's family, the debutante terrified she'd have to marry a man who valued her face over her mind. "You're giving them permission to want more," Eleanor observed, watching the growing gathering of women around Clara. "That's revolutionary." "I'm just being honest about my own struggles," Clara protested. "Exactly. And honesty is the most dangerous weapon against a system built on pretense." Eleanor smiled. "I think you're about to change the entire landscape of what it means to be an aristocratic woman, whether you intended to or not." As midnight approached, Adrian finally claimed his wife and led her away from the crowds, through quiet corridors to the ducal apartments that were now hers. Clara stood in the center of the elegant rooms, her rooms, and tried to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. "I'm a duchess," she whispered. "You're my duchess." Adrian pulled her close, his hands gentle as he began unpinning the elaborate curls. "And tomorrow, you're going to wake up and start remaking what that means. But tonight, can we just be Adrian and Clara? Two people who found each other and were brave enough to choose real over easy?" Clara turned in his arms, feeling the weight of the day settle into something softer. "I love you. I don't think I've actually said it out loud yet, but I do. Desperately and completely and probably unwisely, given how little time we've actually known each other." Adrian's smile was devastating. "I've loved you since I was 16 and a strange girl sat beside a stream and gave me hope. I just had to wait 12 years to find you again and convince you that you deserve to be found." He kissed her then. Not the careful public kiss from the ceremony, but something deeper and more honest. A promise of partnership and passion, and all the years they'd spend proving that real love was worth fighting for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Clara laughed against his shoulder. "Society is going to be so disappointed if we turn out to be genuinely happy. They're expecting scandal and regret. Then let's disappoint them spectacularly." Adrian swept her into his arms, making her squeak with surprise. "Starting right now." The months that followed transformed everything. Clara discovered that being Duchess of Blackthorn came with unexpected power. She opened Blackthorn Hall's library to local girls who wanted to learn but lacked resources. She continued attending Somerset's salons and started hosting her own gatherings where women could discuss ideas freely. She worked with Adrian to implement progressive policies on their estates, ensuring tenant families had access to education and health care, and she published her stories. The collection appeared under her own name, Stories from the Shadows by Clara Whitmore, Duchess of Blackthorn. The dedication read simply, "For every girl who was told she didn't matter, you do." The response was explosive. Conservative critics condemned the stories as inappropriate for a duchess. Progressive readers celebrated them as revolutionary. Women wrote letters by the hundreds, sharing their own experiences of being overlooked and thanking Clara for giving voice to their silent struggles. "You've started a movement," the Duchess of Somerset told Clara at one of their Thursday salons. "Whether you intended to or not, women across England are using your example to justify their own intellectual pursuits. Husbands who would have dismissed their wives' interests are suddenly finding it harder to argue when a duchess publicly values substance over performance." "I just told the truth," Clara protested. "Exactly. And truth is the most powerful weapon against a system built on lies." Somerset smiled. "Keep writing. Keep being honest. Keep showing that women can be both powerful and authentic. That's how we change the world, one brave woman at a time." Eleanor flourished in her new independence, taking rooms in London and beginning to paint again, something she'd given up years ago to focus on being beautiful. Her work was raw and honest, and Somerset's gallery agreed to show it. Mrs. Whitmore remained horrified by both daughters' unconventional choices, but Clara noticed her mother stopped trying to force Sophie into a similar decorative role. Sophie, inspired by her sisters, announced she had no intention of marrying young. She wanted to travel, to learn, to experience the world before being tied to expectations. Mrs. Whitmore looked ready to faint, but Mr. Whitmore, to everyone's surprise, supported his youngest daughter's decision. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "it's time we stopped treating our daughters as decorative investments and started seeing them as people." 6 months after the wedding, Clara stood at her window overlooking Blackthorn Hall's gardens, one hand resting on her gently swelling stomach. The morning sun painted everything gold, and she could see Adrian below, walking the grounds with a group of tenant farmers, listening to their concerns about crop rotation and irrigation. She'd been terrified when she discovered she was pregnant, afraid of failing at motherhood the way she'd been told she'd fail at everything else. But Adrian had pulled her close and reminded her that she'd already proven she could survive anything society threw at her. A baby would just be the next adventure. "Your Grace." A maid appeared in the doorway. "The Duchess of Somerset has arrived with several other ladies. They say you're expected at the salon?" Clara smiled. She'd completely forgotten. "Tell them I'll be down in a moment." She dressed quickly in one of her simpler day dresses. She'd discovered that being Duchess didn't require constant performance, just confidence in her own worth, and descended to find her drawing room filled with women. Somerset and her usual circle, plus a dozen new faces. Young women Clara didn't recognize but who watched her with expressions of nervous hope. "Ladies," Clara greeted them, "welcome to Blackthorn Hall. I apologize for my tardiness. Pregnancy makes everything take twice as long as it should." Nervous laughter rippled through the group. One of the younger women, barely 18, stepped forward with trembling courage. "Your Grace, we wanted to meet you, to thank you." Her voice shook but strengthened as she spoke. "I'm Miss Alice Pemberton. My father wanted me to marry a man 3 times my age who values my dowry over my thoughts. But after reading your stories and hearing about your salons, I found the courage to refuse. Father was furious until I showed him the letters you wrote to Lady Somerset about women's education. He's agreed to let me attend university instead." Tears streamed down her face. "You saved my life, Your Grace, just by being brave enough to be yourself." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm not. I was just trying to survive. You did more than survive. You showed us it was possible to thrive while being real." Another woman spoke up, older, confident. "I'm Mrs. Sarah Mitchell. I've been writing in secret for 20 years, destroying everything I create because my husband considers it inappropriate. But after your book was published, I stopped destroying my work. I'm submitting it to publishers now, and if they reject it, I'll keep trying, because you proved that our stories matter." One by one, the women shared their transformations. The Baroness who'd started painting again. The Countess who'd left a loveless marriage. The merchant's daughter who'd demanded intellectual respect from her aristocratic fiancé. The young mother who'd started teaching her daughters that intelligence mattered more than beauty. "You've created a revolution," Somerset said quietly, "not through grand gestures or political maneuvering, but simply by refusing to apologize for existing. And now you're about to have a daughter of your own who will grow up in a world that's slightly less hostile to authentic women. That's your legacy, Clara. You changed the world by being brave enough to be yourself." Clara looked around at the gathering of women, some powerful, some struggling, all of them claiming space they'd been told they didn't deserve. And she realized that the invisible daughter had become something she'd never imagined, a symbol of possibility for every girl who'd ever felt overlooked. "Thank you," Clara said quietly, "for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for believing I deserved recognition when I'd almost given up hoping, and for being brave enough to demand recognition for yourselves. That's how we change things, not by waiting for permission, but by claiming the space we deserve and refusing to leave." The salon that afternoon was the most energetic yet, women sharing ideas, challenging conventions, supporting each other's unconventional dreams. Clara watched it all unfold in her drawing room and felt something settle deep in her chest. Not contentment exactly, but something close. The bone-deep certainty that she'd found her purpose. She wasn't just a duchess. She was proof that overlooked girls could thrive if given the chance. And she was going to spend the rest of her life making sure other women had that chance too. Adrian found her later that evening, standing by the stream where they'd first met. The same water burbled over the same stones, but everything else had transformed. "I was thinking about that afternoon," Clara said as he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "When I was 11 and you were 16 and we were both so lost. If someone had told me then that we'd end up here, married, happy, changing the world together, I would have thought they were insane." "I would have believed it," Adrian murmured against her hair. "Even then, I knew you were extraordinary. I just had to wait for you to believe it too." Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd chosen her when the entire world looked away. "I'm still terrified sometimes. Still wake up wondering if this is all a dream that will shatter when people realize I'm just perfect exactly as you are?" Adrian interrupted gently. "Clara, you've published a revolutionary book. You're hosting salons that challenge aristocratic conventions. You're about to become a mother who will raise our daughter to believe her thoughts matter more than her appearance. You've transformed what it means to be a duchess. If that's just anything, I'd love to know what extraordinary looks like to you." "I couldn't have done any of it without you believing in me first." "No. I just gave you permission to believe in yourself. Everything else, every brave choice, every defiant stand, every honest word, that was all you." Adrian pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You were never invisible, love. People were just too blind to see you, and now that they're looking, they can't look away." As the sun set over Blackthorn Hall's gardens, painting everything in shades of gold and rose, Clara stood in her husband's arms and finally believed what everyone had been trying to tell her. She wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. She was the woman who'd survived being overlooked and emerged stronger. The duchess who chose authenticity over performance. The writer who gave voice to silent struggles. The revolutionary who changed the world simply by refusing to apologize for existing. She was Clara Whitmore, Duchess of Blackthorn, and she was finally, completely, unforgettably herself. A year later, Clara sat in the same drawing room where she'd hosted her first nervous salon, her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. Lady Catherine Blackthorn, named for the great-grandmother who'd first worn the sapphire necklace, had her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair. She was perfect and tiny and already loved beyond measure. The Dowager Duchess sat across from Clara, watching her great-granddaughter with an expression of fierce satisfaction. "She'll grow up in a different world than we did," the older woman observed. "A world where intelligent women are celebrated instead of dismissed, where authenticity matters more than performance, where being overlooked isn't accepted as inevitable, but challenged as injustice." "Because you survived it first," Clara said quietly, "and taught me how to survive it too." "No, because you refused to accept that survival was enough. You demanded thriving." The Dowager Duchess smiled. "I created space for myself." "You created space for an entire generation of women. That's the difference between enduring and transforming." A commotion from the entrance hall drew their attention. Eleanor swept in, her hands covered in paint and her expression radiating joy. Clara, my exhibition sold out completely. Every painting. The gallery wants to commission more work. They're calling me a revolutionary voice in modern art. Because you are, Clara replied, grinning at her sister's excitement. You stopped performing beauty and started creating it. That's revolutionary. Sophie followed, fresh from her travels through Italy. I've been invited to lecture at Oxford about women's education reform. Oxford, Clara. They want a 20-year-old girl with no formal credentials to speak to their students because someone told them I was brilliant. She laughed. Being your sister comes with unexpected advantages. Being yourselves comes with advantages, Clara corrected. I just proved it was possible first. You two proved it was sustainable. As evening fell, Adrian joined them, scooping his daughter from Clara's arms with the careful reverence of a man still amazed he'd helped create something so perfect. Clara watched him coo at their baby and felt her heart swell with a happiness so profound it almost hurt. Do you ever regret it? She asked him later, when they were alone. Choosing the complicated path? You could have married someone beautiful and accomplished and easy. Someone who fit perfectly into society's expectations. Adrian looked at her like she'd lost her mind. I chose you. That means I chose reality over fantasy, substance over surface, partnership over decoration. Why would I regret choosing the only real thing in a world of performance? Because I'm difficult, because I challenge conventions, because I'll never be the decorative Duchess society expected. Thank heavens for that. Adrian pulled her close. Decorative duchesses are boring. Revolutionary ones who transform the entire social landscape while raising our daughter to be extraordinary? Those are worth celebrating. Clara laughed against his chest, feeling the last vestiges of old fear finally release their hold. She'd spent 23 years believing she was invisible because she wasn't beautiful enough, charming enough, valuable enough. And then she'd discovered that invisibility was never about worth. It was only ever about people who refused to look deeper than surface shine. She'd been overlooked because she threatened a system built on shallow performance, because her authenticity challenged every woman who'd learned to hide behind pretty masks, because her intelligence demanded recognition in a world that preferred women to be decorative. But she'd survived. More than survived, she'd thrived. And in thriving, she'd created space for other women to do the same. The invisible daughter had become unforgettable, not by changing who she was, but by finally having the courage to be exactly herself in a world that demanded conformity. And that made all the difference. As Clara stood at her window that night, watching moonlight paint Blackthorn Hall's gardens silver, she thought about the girl she'd been, lonely and dismissed, writing stories in the margins of invisibility. And she thought about the woman she'd become, powerful and purposeful, changing the world by refusing to apologize for existing. The journey from forgotten to unforgettable hadn't been easy. It had been terrifying and painful and full of moments when retreat seemed safer than persistence. But every time she'd been tempted to disappear back into comfortable invisibility, something had pushed her forward. Adrian's unwavering belief, the Dowager Duchess's fierce training, her sister's transformations, the letters from women thanking her for giving them courage, and most importantly, the slowly growing certainty that she deserved to take up space in the world. That was the real transformation, not becoming Duchess or publishing stories or hosting salons, but learning to believe, bone deep, unshakably, that she mattered exactly as she was. The invisible daughter had learned to see herself, and in seeing herself clearly, she'd helped countless other women do the same. That was power. That was revolution. That was the legacy she'd leave for her daughter and every girl who came after. You didn't have to be beautiful or charming or perfectly polished to matter. You just had to be brave enough to be real in a world that preferred performance. And Clara Whitmore, Duchess of Blackthorn, once the forgotten middle daughter, now the woman who'd transformed an entire social system, had proven that authentic courage was stronger than any shallow expectation. She was no longer invisible. She was unforgettable. And she would spend the rest of her life making sure no other girl ever had to earn the right to be seen.